End of day 1. End of day 1. After Midoriya's aura farming moment, and a small altercation with Bakugo going bonkers at Midoriya for having a quirk, the class continued with the rest of the tests like normal. Sit-ups, seated toe touch, long-distance run, all of them relatively simple exercises, and still something Taka made use of to aura farm somehow. During most tests, Yaoyorozu stood at the lead, with the crazy inventions she produced with her quirk often surpassing what any of the others could reach with their own quirk. Of course, that was without counting Taka. The teenager kept crushing every test with overwhelming power, placing himself at the top in each one, save for the baseball throw, where Uraraka managed to score infinity with her quirk by erasing the ball's gravity. During it all, sadly, Midoriya's performance dropped a tad more thanks to the wretched pain coming from his broken finger. It made it so that, even after clutching up at the baseball throw, he still went back to the bottom of the rankings in no time. And so, just like that, 30 minutes and several other tests later, the quirk assessment test came to an end. Once they were done, the whole class reunited outside the gym, watching as Aizawa pulled a remote from his pocket and projected everyone's results. Instantly, all eyes were drawn to the projected board of results, most of the students being nervous or worried about what they were about to see. Midoriya, in particular. After all, while they had a faint understanding of how they had done, nothing said the teacher wouldn't evaluate them in a completely unexpected way, and end up with them in the dreaded last place. At least, until Aizawa himself explained that the scores were simply the results from the tests added together. That was enough to set Midoriya in a spiral of worry. He, after all, was the one the most aware of how much he had sucked. And, to his dismay, as soon as the results were revealed, what he had feared became true. There, at the bottom of the list, was his name, ranked last in the class. On the other hand, well, I was gonna crash out if I hadn't been there, Taka thought with a snort as he saw his name at the top, followed by Yaoyorozu and then Todoroki. As expected, he had dominated. I guess that concludes the aura farming for the day. He sighed, tension faintly leaving his shoulders. As for Midoriya being at the very bottom, he didn't bat an eye. After all. By the way, Aizawa spoke up nonchalantly as he turned off the projection. I was lying about the whole expulsion thing. Instantly, most of the class's faces twisted into bafflement. What? Aizawa seemed to smirk at their suffering, looking at them with a mocking gaze. It was a rational deception to force you to push your limits. Instantly, those at the lower ranks became exasperated, namely Midoriya, for thinking this had been the end, and Iida, because he had trusted the teacher with all his heart. Of course it was a lie. Yaoyorozu chimed in upon seeing their upset reactions, sweat dropping faintly. It would have been obvious if you had just thought it through. Those who had been worried earlier sweat dropped as well, mentally slapping themselves for falling for it, at least, until a voice cut through. I wouldn't be so sure about that, Taka said ominously out of the sudden, drawing most eyes to him. What? Yaoyorozu turned to him, baffled. Sadly, she didn't get an answer, as Taka simply closed his eyes enigmatically. And before she could press for answers. With that, we're done here. There are handouts with the curriculum and such in the classroom. So when you get back, give them a look. Aizawa said, turning around to leave. Albeit, just before doing so, he passed a doctor's note to the injured greenhead. Midoriya, have the old lady fix you in the nurse's office, Weren't you injured? His eyebrows furrowed slightly as he glanced at Midoriya's previously broken finger, now completely healed. And it seemed he wasn't the only one to just realize it. When did it? Midoriya stared at his finger in bafflement, now without any trace of ever having been broken. While the teacher and Midoriya's new friends tried to comprehend what had just happened, Taka snorted and turned to walk away, heading toward the changing rooms. Didn't even cost me 300 aura to fix it, he smirked inwardly, glancing at the skill that had been the hardest to unlock of them all. Aura projection, their mode active. Description: to destroy is easy, and a basic skill of any aura farmer. But is the aura farmer truly one if he can't walk the most difficult path as well? Because harder than destruction is the path of creation and protection. Suffering is part of the cold universe they inhabit, but with his light, the aura farmer can dampen the cold and bring protection to those around him. For the aura farmer is more than a cool weapon. He is also a cool protector. Filled right pointing small triangle allows the user to regenerate their own or others' wounds by expending aura. Filled right pointing small triangle expenditure is based on how much of the body currently requires treatment. Bigger parts require bigger chunks of aura. Filled right pointing small triangle. Certain parts of the body require more aura to heal. Vital organs are the most expensive. Filled right pointing small triangle. Due to the type of transformation aura undergoes, aura recovers at half the usual speed compared to other modes. Very good indeed. Taka nodded, satisfied. It was indeed a glorious skill, albeit crazily expensive. But he supposed that was appropriate, otherwise, it would be far too easy to abuse. Even though Midoriya's finger had only cost him around 300 aura to fix, a finger was a very small part of the body. Healing larger areas could easily reach the thousands in cost, maybe even surpassing the tens of thousands. Not to mention vital organs, he didn't even dare think about how much those would cost to heal. He hadn't yet had the chance to test more serious healing, but as things stood now, with his aura pool hovering around 40,000, he still didn't feel capable of performing a truly powerful heal if someone ever needed it. Still, for now, it was enough. And when the time came that large-scale healing became necessary, he'd probably have a much larger aura pool anyway. As for why he had decided to heal Midoriya's finger when there had been no real need to, especially with Recovery Girl around. It was all for the sake of aura farming. When the day he'd have to reveal his healing abilities finally came, the impact would be far greater. Everyone would connect all those moments of inexplicable recovery and trace them back to him at the moment of truth. But why was he so blatantly risking exposure, you ask? The answer was simple. Hiding his skills had never been the goal, only a means to an end. Or rather, a means to aura farm later in the story. In truth, he never planned on staying hidden forever. After all, the more the show progressed, the stronger his opponents would become, and hence the more abilities he'd inevitably be forced to reveal to stay up to the level. And knowing that day would come eventually, and seeing no point in wasting all that aura by playing it low-key forever, why not prepare for the future? Why not plant all these seeds, so the moment he had to show his true abilities, he could aura farm as hard as he could with them? Besides, his vigilante charges weren't that much of a deal, at least not in the long term. When the day came that his identity as Rakanessus was revealed, and he had to face the heavyweights of this world, and probably save it in the process, what were the chances they wouldn't forgive him for his vigilante days after all that? And even if they don't, living as a wanted guy running from the law is also pretty auric. He thought, the strongest criminal in the world. That sounds tough as hell. Grinning now that his back was facing everyone and they couldn't see his face, Taka awaited patiently for the future. Whatever was to come his way in the future, he would be thoroughly prepared to aura farm the heck out of it. Degree. Minutes later, having changed back into their regular uniforms, and after stopping by their classroom to pick up the handouts Aizawa had mentioned, the students gradually began leaving the school premises. Taka walked alongside Jiro, the two already heading toward the gates, followed by dozens of students around them. As they walked, she sighed tiredly, sounding like a 90-year-old grandma. Huff, I thought I was a goner back there. When I didn't see my name in the first row of students, I thought, this is it, I'm getting expelled on my first day of school. Taka raised an eyebrow. Why, Midoriya was doing terribly. Midoriya, oh, the green-haired kid. Jiro nodded. Well, he got a pretty amazing result in the baseball throw. I got some fairly good results in the other tests, but not as good as his, so I got worried for a second. Taka seemed to ponder that for a moment. I suppose it makes sense. Still, you clearly did better than Hagakure. Her quirk just wasn't suited for this kind of test. Jiro deadpanned. I just panicked. Okay. No need to overanalyze it. Then, after a brief pause, she looked at Taka with a puzzled expression. By the way, how did you know her name? I didn't even see you talk to her. Taka clicked his tongue inwardly, cursing his loose mouth again, before quickly coming up with an excuse. I just have a good memory. With the teacher mentioning names once, I already got the hang of most of them. Seriously? Jiro asked, surprised. Taka nodded without changing his expression. So an overpowered quirk and a good memory. You really hit the genetic lottery, huh? Taka smiled faintly. I suppose. Jiro grumbled in discontent for a moment before her eyebrows lit up faintly in mischief, recalling something. By the way, what was with all that during the tests? Taka didn't bat an eye. What was with what? Jiro's gaze turned accusatory. You know, the extra steps, the looking cool, when you could have just done the tests normally. You really thought you were being subtle. I don't know what you're talking about, Taka denied, eyes fixed straight ahead. That's just how I usually do tests. Jiro didn't seem ready to let the matter go that easily, grin widening, at least until Taka suddenly turned his gaze on her, cutting her off. Anyway, you thought I looked cool, huh? Jiro's words caught in her throat. After a moment of silence, she looked away, grumbling under her breath. Let's change the subject. Snorting with a faint smile, Taka nodded. Like that, the two eventually left the school premises and headed toward the station. Making small chat on the way. What station are you going to? She asked as they neared the subway. My parents got me an apartment near Shinjuku. I'm not going to one. I live just around here, Taka said, gesturing with his head vaguely. We moved here temporarily since it's close to the school. With Seijizan, Yeah, with that guy, Taka replied, distaste evident in his tone. Jiro chuckled. Eventually, they parted ways as she entered the station. Taka, on the other hand, turned around and slipped into a nearby alleyway as soon as he was left alone. Then, swoosh, after making sure no one had seen him, he soared into the sky, using his aura both to elevate at high speed and to dampen the noise of his ascent. Once airborne, he shot forward in the direction of Shizuoka, his speed enormous as he cut through the countless clouds above. As he soared across the open sky, his thoughts drifted back to the day. Evaluating his own performance with a thoughtful face. My introduction was a bit forceful, but I think I nailed it during the tests. There's no way they don't think I'm cool now, he nodded to himself, albeit deadpanning a bit as he recalled Jiro's comment after school. Still, I should be careful not to make it too obvious that I'm aura farming. Otherwise, I'll just look like some narcissistic dude trying to look humble instead of the composed, naturally cool persona I'm aiming for. The tests themselves had been a tad too simple, which forced him to improvise ways to farm aura in them. And he had accomplished it. However, in the process, they might have made his intentions a little too obvious. Well, tomorrow's class should make aura farming simpler, he thought, a smirk forming on his face. After all, if things go as per the show, tomorrow there'll be a combat class. There, he wouldn't need to think of complex ways to aura farm like today. Instead, it'd be as simple as overwhelming his opponents. Although if they were too weak, that'd be kind of a waste, or somehow end up in him looking bad instead. Maybe I can find a way to force myself to fight the heavy hitters of the class. Taka mused, already planning ahead. Regardless, tomorrow would be a great day to aura farm. Not only because of combat, but because the fit is gonna be immaculate. Tomorrow, they were getting their hero suits. To be continued. One subject left, and my arsonist impulses will fade away. 23 comments 0 vote. Hero Basic Training Class. Hero Basic Training Class. The second day of classes arrived the day after the first. Everyone was already gathered in the classroom, waiting patiently for their teacher to arrive, either making small talk with the classmates seated nearby or messing around on their phones. Everyone, save for one person. Slam. The door opened suddenly, and a familiar figure stepped in, drawing most eyes and plunging the class into brief silence. It was Taka, of course. New day, new opportunities to aura farm. He let everyone get a good look at him for a second or two, then made his way to his seat, right behind Midoriya, next to Tokiyami, and in front of Yaoyorozu. Bzzz. As he sat down and set his things aside, however, the vibration of his cell phone startled him. Curious, he took it out, and to his surprise. Jiro, didn't you say you were here 20 minutes earlier? How come you're last again? Taka clicked his tongue internally and glanced toward Jiro, who was seated a few rows away and looking at him with a sly smirk. He quickly typed a reply. You went to buy something to drink. A response came almost instantly. Jiro, I didn't see anything in your hands when you came in, though. I already drank it. Jiro, just how thirsty were you? Jiro was now shooting him a disbelieving look. Having successfully dodged the question, Taka sighed faintly and put his phone away, leaning back in his chair comfortably. At least, until a hand lightly tapped his shoulder. Excuse me, Takahashi-san. He turned around to see Yaoyorozu sitting there, behind him, looking a bit timid. Well, after yesterday's round of aura farming, I guess I'm a tad imposing, Taka mused for a moment before addressing her. What's up? His casual response seemed to have lessened her worry, judging by her more comfortable look. Well, after what you said yesterday, my apologies. Her eyes suddenly widened, panic flashing across her face. She bowed faintly from her seat. I'm Momo Yaoyorozu. I apologize for the late introduction. Taka's sweat dropped faintly. Are all rich kids this proper? His gaze flicked briefly to Iida, who sat upright in his seat, stiff as a statue and likely waiting for the teacher to arrive. Quickly, his attention returned to Yaoyorozu, and he offered her a polite nod. It's fine. I'm Takahashi Fukumoto, though you can just call me Taka. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, too, Takahashi-san. Another one using my full name. Taka rolled his eyes, internally. First Jiro, now Yaoyorozu. He was giving them the chance to save themselves a mouthful. Only Kirishima had accepted his grace so far. Well, to each their own. So, what were you saying? Taka asked. She perked up, her expression turning serious once more. Yes, I wanted to ask you about what you said yesterday. What did I say yesterday? Taka wondered. A moment later, it clicked, and his expression flattened slightly. Quote. Is it about the expulsion thing? Yes. You disagreed with me when I said the expulsion threat had been false. If I may ask, why? She's still on that. Taka stared at her for a moment, speechless. At the time, he'd only wanted to aura farm a bit by acting mysterious. But since she was still curious about it, even after his edgy exit yesterday without an answer, he supposed he could explain. It wasn't like he'd lied, after all. Well, I'm pretty sure he actually expelled the current second years when they entered. Yaoyorozu looked genuinely shocked. What? But that exclamation hadn't come from her. The startled voice of someone outside the conversation cut in, catching both of them off guard. They turned slightly to see Midoriya leaning toward them, eyes wide with panic. Only after realizing they had heard him, and were now staring at him, along with everyone else who'd been startled by his shout, did he panic and turn back around. Ah, sorry, this guy sure has a long way to go. Taka smiled wryly at Midoriya's quick-to-panic nature. His mind immediately drifted to the arc where the guy went all edgy and serious. That was when he really began aura farming properly. Of course, he had a few memorable moments before that, but only after that point did he become a more thorough fighter, and a more consistent aura farmer. For now, though, there was still a long way to go before that happened. Over a year, Taka snorted. It wasn't actually that long, now that he thought about it. If anything, it just showed how absurd this year was going to be, with all the bad stuff crammed into a single stretch of time. Well, I'm gonna be here this time, I should be able to turn a few bad things around, Taka thought, recalling the scale of certain events to come, and the repercussions they'd have on everyone involved. Now that he was here, though, he could make sure those things didn't happen. And while he was at it, aura farm. Because it was never a bad time to aura farm. Having established his priorities, Taka turned back to Yaoyorozu, who was still looking oddly at Midoriya's already turned back figure. Anyway, you can ask them yourself after class. Ah, yes, thank you very much. Yaoyorozu nodded faintly as she turned back to him. With the conversation coming to an end, Taka faced forward again. Not because he didn't know what else to say, but because an aura farmer must be silent and cool, yes. As he resumed his silent, meditative pose, the classroom door suddenly opened, and his eyes snapped open, a smirk forming on his face. Finally, here he is, all mig. Hell yeah, what's up, students? Taka pursed his lips as the one who burst through the door turned out to be Present Mic, not All Might. Only then did he remember the curriculum Aizawa had handed them yesterday. Right, that class was in the afternoon. Sweet-dropping at his mistake, he sighed faintly. It seemed the aura farming would have to wait a few more hours. Degree, UA, afternoon, I miscalculated, Taka muttered as he slammed his head onto the desk. Mentally, of course, when he'd planned to enroll in UA, he'd only thought about all the moments where he'd be able to aura farm. What he'd completely glossed over was the fact that it was, first and foremost, an actual school. Alright, he hadn't really forgotten. He just hadn't paid it much mind. Now, however, he was facing the harsh truth. The show had focused only on the interesting parts, conveniently skipping over the long, boring classes that naturally came with a school setting, and with the main cast being students. Don't get him wrong, he wasn't bad at studying. He'd worked like hell alongside his clones to get good grades, which he did. But he definitely wasn't some prodigy. So whenever a teacher asked a question, he sweated bullets worrying he'd answer wrong, and lose aura in the process. Fortunately, so far, he'd managed to answer everything correctly. But that brought up another problem. Besides aura farming in clutch moments, he'd also have to worry about not screwing up during the downtime from now on. And for an entire year, Taka sighed. As always, the path of the aura farmer was never easy. Still, he had finally made it through the whole day. And along with it, the moment he had been waiting for had finally arrived. IAM. Taka's head lifted, and he glared toward the classroom entrance as a sly glint appeared in his eyes. Coming through the door like a normal person, along with the shout, the massive figure of a man stepped into the classroom, no smaller than Titanophyte, but all muscle instead of rock. His wide smile and imposing presence immediately filled the room with awe, most, if not all, of the students gaping at the hero's appearance. Of course, save for Taka, who merely glanced at All Might with an analytical gaze. Well, if it isn't my errand boy. And of course, the biggest aura farmer of our time. While Taka liked to joke about him being his errand boy, the truth was that if there was anyone worth learning about aura dynamics from, it was this man. The one and only, the symbol of peace, a hero so powerful and influential that a single smile could calm the hearts of everyone watching, no matter how dire the situation. A single phrase of his could instill hope in some hearts, and fear in others. And a single punch could erase all evil or protect all good. Not to mention that, powers or not, he could aura farm just fine. The man, far in the future as per the show, fought the world-ending villain using nothing but a high-tech suit, his body wrecked by old injuries, and his powers long gone. And to top it all off, he laughed his ass off in the villain's face. If that wasn't aura, then he didn't know what it was. Albeit, he and other students ended up in a pretty shit condition after the battle. Well, things won't need to go that far with me here, Taka snorted, closing his eyes for a brief moment. Only to open them again a second later, determination blazing in his gaze. Now, show me what you've got, All Might. While Taka was taking this far too seriously, All Might had already reached the teacher's podium. He stood before the class with both fists on his waist, his wide smile radiating warmth. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I teach hero basic training. Here, you'll train in different ways to learn the fundamentals of being a hero, and it'll be the subject you spend the most hours on as heroes in training. The class nodded almost in unison, completely taken in by his presence. Having said that, let's get straight into it. He flexed, apparently pulling something from his pocket in a stylish motion before flashing it toward the class. What we'll be doing today is this. All eyes snapped to the object in his hand, and the moment the students recognized it, excited murmurs spread through the room. There, held between his fingers, was a card. One that read, Battle. Combat Training, All Might announced, just in case anyone hadn't seen it. Then he whipped his arm toward the adjacent wall. And to go with that, we have these. Several compartments began sliding out from the wall, revealing boxes numbered from 1 to 20. All Might's smile widened, focusing back on the students. Costumes based on your Quirk registrations and the requests you submitted before school started. The instant the word costumes left All Might's mouth, excitement exploded throughout the class. Everyone wanted to see how their costumes had turned out and, of course, try them on. He really knows how to handle a crowd, Taka thought silently as he observed the surrounding reaction and All Might's theatrics, rubbing his chin. Still, he did not ignore the mention of the costumes, his gaze instantly settling on the number 19. Let's see if they did it as I asked, or if I'm gonna have to kill someone today. Degree. Minutes later, All Might stood before the entrance to ground beta, patiently awaiting the arrival of his students. As he waited, his mind drifted back to the moment he had presented himself to the class. Before that, Nezu had told him he would find a very interesting student among them. Curious, he had reviewed everyone's quirks beforehand, save for young Midoriya's. While several of them had shown promising potential, none had truly stood out as someone Nezu would go out of his way to point out. At least, that had been the case. Until he stepped into the classroom. The moment he crossed the door, he felt it, the piercing gaze of one of the students. Amid all the other excited stares, this other one could have easily gone unnoticed. Yet the presence that the student emanated made it impossible to ignore. The gaze didn't hold hostility, but it certainly wasn't pleasant, either. If he had to describe it, it reminded him of the gaze Endeavor used to direct at him during their years at UA. But in this student's eyes, there was something Endeavor's glare had never possessed. Certainty. Whatever the student had been thinking as he stared at him, there hadn't been a single ounce of doubt behind it. Humming thoughtfully, All Might opened his teacher's folder and scanned through the class list until he found the photo attached to that presence. Takahashi Fukumoto, Quirk. Muscle to mind. Yes, he had seen it earlier, and he had considered it a quirk with solid potential. But now, having met him, perhaps there was something more to this boy. Smiling faintly, All Might closed the folder and looked ahead. Well, he thought, this is the perfect chance to find out, isn't it? His bright blue eyes shone with interest as figures began emerging from the shadows of the entrance. Clearing his throat, he raised his voice to address the approaching students. They say clothes make the man, young men and ladies, and that applies here just the same. Class 1A stepped into the light, the vibrant and flashy colors of their hero suits blending together into an impressive sight. All Might's smile widened. Now that you're wearing those outfits, be fully aware that from this moment on, he paused for effect, you are heroes. Chins lifted proudly across the group, the title accepted with a mix of nervousness and reverence. Soon, however, another figure emerged from behind, clearly late compared to the rest. All Might's eyes narrowed slightly. A moment later, the student stepped into the light, revealing. Did I make it in time? Midoriya, clad in a Bugs Bunny-like suit. All Might nearly choked at the sight, immediately recognizing the inspiration. So obvious, he struggled not to laugh. With everyone finally gathered, the students began glancing at one another's costumes, excitement and competitiveness rising in equal measure. Everyone wanted their suit to be praised, and everyone wanted to see what choices the others had made. But as they chatted about designs and possible future adjustments, another sound echoed from the darkened entrance. Step, a single footfall, calm and measured, yet somehow loud enough that nearly everyone heard it. Immediately, all eyes turned toward the source, the dark hallway where they had all come from. And from within it, they could all see it. A figure was approaching, his pace deliberate and almost regal. Instantly, everyone knew who it was, and all focus centered on it. And soon, the figure stepped into the light, or rather, it felt as though the shadows followed him out. Unlike the vivid colors of the others, save for one student in particular, this one stood in stark contrast to the bright day. A dark coat, a stylish yet strangely savage-looking black tricorn hat, and a mask covering everything up to his nose, plus many garments that only added to the edginess. Image greater than. As he made his entrance, reactions rippled through the group. A certain raven-headed student nodded in quiet acknowledgement. A certain earphone jack earlobbed student deadpanned, muttering something about someone being right behind her, and somehow still managing to arrive last again. A certain red-haired student's eyes sparkled, mumbling about manliness and whatnot. A certain explosive blonde clicked his tongue in annoyance. And a certain white and red-haired student stoically ignored it. Less than +50 aura. Greater than. Yes, I look quite awesome, I know. Taka had arrived, to be continued. There we go, another chapter, and finally getting to the combat exercise. I had some free time and managed to write a chapter. Might be able to come up with a chapter for tomorrow as well, or not, who knows. Anyway, see you next chap. 47 comments 0 vote. Combat exercise. A bit late, but I was trying to get some sleep after not getting much last night. Sadly, it didn't work out, and I had to chug a monster to last the rest of the day. Today I'm sleeping early, that's for sure. Also, for those who didn't like the costume, it's okay, I respect it. It's okay to have wrong opinions. Combat exercise. Once everyone was fully reunited and they had all gotten a good look at Taka's extravagant costume, All Might began giving the instructions for the exercise right away. In summary, the class would be segmented into several teams of 2 students, who would take on the roles of either heroes or villains. 2 opposing teams would then face off inside the many buildings scattered across Ground Beta, each match having its own building to destroy. The villains' objective was to protect a mock bomb placed at the top of the building. The heroes, on the other hand, had to start from the bottom floors and reach the bomb to deactivate it. The victory conditions were fairly simple. The villains would win if they managed to protect the bomb until the 15-minute limit ran out, or if they apprehended all the heroes using the capture bindings they'd been given. Achieving either condition would secure their victory. The heroes, meanwhile, would win if they touched the bomb, counting as deactivation for the exercise, or if they apprehended the villains using the same bindings they, too, had been provided. Once the instructions were given, and a certain glassed student's multiple questions were answered, the students stepped forward one by one to draw balls from a box, each marked with letters from A to J, to determine their teams. As the process went on, Taka began thinking of ways to rig the whole thing so he could get matched against Bakugo or Todoroki, who were currently the strongest contenders in class. While doing so, his turn came, and he was offered the box to take a ball out. A moment after rummaging through it, he glanced down at the ball he had drawn. Team I, and his partner. Hagakure, he sweat dropped, turning to look, or rather, not look, at the invisible girl at the other side of the group. Damn. Immediately, all of his plans went straight down the gutter. He had hoped things would play out as they did in the show, letting him use his foreknowledge to identify which ball belonged to which team and subtly manipulate them with his aura so he could fight whoever he wanted. But seeing the invisible girl there made something painfully clear. They already weren't the same. His eyes swept across the other groups forming around the field, narrowing as his worries cemented. The teams were different from the show, which meant the matches would probably be, too. That left him with no way of knowing which ball belonged to Todoroki's team, or Bakugo's. And with the remaining balls hidden inside the box, right beside All Might, even trying to peek was close to impossible. He wasn't that fast yet. Well, so much for aura farming, Taka clicked his tongue. If only he had a way to make something like an actual astral projection, so he could check on the box without being noticed. He didn't, in case you were hoping otherwise. Still, it's a pretty good idea, I might try it out later. He squinted faintly at the idea. Hello, Takahashi-kun, right? A voice calling out to him snapped him out of his ideas. A bit nervous, but trying to sound calm. He turned and saw that Hagakure had approached on her own, namely, only her gloves and shoes. The rest of her was invisible. Focus, man. Preventing his mind from wandering into strange topics, he offered a hand. That, or Taka, whatever you feel like calling me. It seemed that the friendly gesture had been enough to erase the nervousness from her voice. Then Taka it is, I'm Toru Hagakure, nice to meet Cha, she said energetically as she shook his hand. Taka nodded faintly, however, inwardly, a smile appeared on his face. Finally, someone else who takes on my offer. The other was Kirishima, but given his focus on aura farming, he hadn't talked much with him. He had to act mysterious all the time, so going to speak to others on his own volition was a no-no. Less than then you ask yourself why have few friends. Greater than, it's the path of the aura. Less than it's not. Greater than, peef, what would you know? As he scoffed inwardly at the system's obvious ignorance on the topic, both he and Hagakure turned to All Might, who had begun the process of establishing the team matches, sinking both hands into two boxes, one for the villains, and the other for the heroes. The hero's hands rummaged through each box, his expression pensive, as if gauging which ones he should pull out first. And as the tension rose amid the class, with each student awaiting to see who they would be fighting. Hold on, a crazy idea formed in Taka's mind. Trouble radar activated. For a moment, nothing changed. But then, quote. He felt it. For a moment, an alert had sprouted, vanishing as soon as it came. It hadn't been of much level, at most, a threat level of 1 or 2. But that much had been enough to prove Taka's theory right. The moment All Might touches my team's ball, it gauges the level of the opposite team's ball his hand is touching. And as if to prove that true, there goes another one, nearly level 3. Taka's impassive face broke into a small smile. Instantly, he laid out his plan. His aura, invisible, expanded and reached the boxes, entering them and covering most of the balls, as well as All Might's hand, without him realizing. Then, Taka simply waited. In the meantime, All Might took out 2 balls, designating the first teams that would fight against each other, Mina and Kaminari as heroes, and Shiro plus Aoyama as villains. Then he went back to rummaging through the boxes, alerts popping up every now and then. Taka simply remained calm, waiting patiently with a watchful eye, until... There it is, a level 4, nearly 5. That was the highest so far. Whether it was Bakugo or Todoroki, it didn't matter. Both worked. He supposed there was a chance it would be Midoriya too, albeit, as he was now, he wasn't much of an opponent, even if the alert said otherwise. Quickly, he made sure to lock onto it with his aura, discreetly pushing it into All Might's hand along with his team's ball as well. And, to his delight, the second match will be, Team B as heroes, against Team I, as villains. All Might announced as he showed both balls to everyone. Both being the ones Taka had chosen. And, if my memory doesn't fail me, Team B should be. His eyes darted across the class, until they landed on a particular someone, who was also glancing his way, eyes narrowed. Todoroki. The moment the two made eye contact, Taka snorted and glanced back ahead. For having escaped eye contact, that would have been his defeat, and a loss in aura. But just before looking away, Taka had shot him a cocky smirk, changing the meaning of it all completely. Utter disrespect. Taka didn't quite catch what Todoroki's expression was after that, but judging by his daddy issues, he probably hadn't liked it much, not that anyone would like it. But that was what he wanted. The angrier he was, the better Taka would aura farm. Albeit, I guess I'll have to take care of her. He thought as he shot Hagakure a short look. That guy does pack quite the punch. If Todoroki went on a rampage, the girl wouldn't be able to do much. Well, fighting with ease while protecting someone at the same time is even more auric, isn't it? Taka mused with a smile. Hell yeah, everything was coming together. Now, all he needed to do was bide his time, until his turn came. Degree. Minutes later. Hero team, wins. All Might shouted as the image of Mina touching the bomb with a smug look was projected to everyone watching the big screen in the monitoring room. After a Natsuto battle in which Aoyama was knocked out quickly, forcing Shiro to do most of the heavy lifting, blocking most of the room with his self-produced tape, only for Mina to dissolve it all easily with her acid and Kaminari to stun him just as quickly, the first battle of the day came to an end. Soon, the two teams made their way into the room, standing at the center for All Might's evaluation of their performance. Now, ladies and gentlemen, who can tell me who was the MPV of this combat exercise? The hero asked, scanning the room. Yaoyorozu, ever the applied student, was the first to raise her hand. Once given the word, she spoke. That would be Ashido-san. Not only was she superior in combat against Aoyama-san, taking him out first, but after that, she also proceeded to weaken all the villain's precautions with her quirk, making it easier for her partner to make the most effective use of his quirk. On the other hand, the villain team lacked in quite a few aspects. There was no coordination between Aoyama-san and Sero-san, which ultimately led to. A minute or so later, Yaoyorozu finished with her profound analysis of each team's performances, leaving even All Might, who was the teacher, a bit at a loss. Still, nothing of what she had said was wrong, so he simply assented and praised her, albeit a tad intimidated. With the review over, it was time for the second match. Alright, everyone, let's change locations and go onwards to the next match. All Might announced, and soon, everyone began moving towards the next building to destroy. Minutes later, the class had gone towards the monitoring room of said building, while the next two teams went to their respective posts on the bottom and top floors. One of the teams being Taka and Hagakure, the villains. The heroes, Todoroki and Sato. The top, very fitting for aura farming. Taka thought as he watched down through the window of the room they were in, a satisfied deadpan on his face. Let's do our best, Taka. Suddenly, someone called out from behind. That being Hagakure. Taka turned, giving her a brief nod. He wasn't sure about his best, but he for sure would put his utmost into aura farming the heck out of his opponent. So, do you have any plans? Hagakure asked, her tone very earnest and somewhat urgent. Taka took a bit to answer. After all, he couldn't just say his plan was to be flexing while Todoroki went all out. So instead, we crush them with overwhelming power. So direct, Hagakure cried out, sounding a bit exasperated. Less than +5 aura. Greater than, though it seemed to have done the job Taka intended. Still, she was right. So he added a bit more detail, so she wouldn't feel so lost. I'll take on Todoroki. His quirk is a bit wild, so I'm gonna have to deal with that first. If I'm not wrong, Sato's quirk strengthens him when he eats sugar, but he gets slower mentally. So if you sneak up on him, you should be able to apprehend him before he's able to react. Alright, one of her floating gloves did a fist-pumping motion, though her voice clearly denoted a bit of nervousness. Her invisibility quirk didn't aid much in combat, besides the sneaking aspect. Only in the later seasons was she able to weaponize it somewhat. Taka mused, recalling how she became able to warp sunlight with her quirk to blind his opponents. Then, there was also the moment when, after Aoyama shot a laser at her, she was able to redirect it as an even more powerful attack towards some villain he couldn't bother to remember. And it happened again when she tanked a full-blown city-destroying laser from the final boss. Albeit, in doing so, her quirk bugged out, and she became visible temporarily, revealing herself as she was born to the world. Hey, system, if I shot her a full-powered aura beam of pure luminic energy, would she? Less than host, I thought you had moved past that already. What were these 12 months for? Greater than. Taka clicked his tongue. It's called intrusive thoughts. And it's quite difficult not to have them when she's literally naked next to me and I have an idea of how she looks from my memories. Less than. Greater than. Besides, I was asking for a moment when she isn't naked. That'd allow her to turn off her quirk for a moment, right? Less than. I'm not very informed about the specifics of Aoyama Yuga's quirk, nor properties that All for One's laser had at moment, but in theory, it should work. Greater than. Taka hummed at the thought. He was pretty sure that after both incidents, they were eventually able to develop a suit for her that would turn invisible along with her. That, or her quirk bugged out so much from that last laser that she got pressured into finding a solution, given her random spasms of visibility. Either way, he could help her get herself a suit for her condition, or at least be able to turn off her invisibility if she wanted. Less than. Why would you do that, host? Greater than. Are you seriously an aura farming system? Taka asked in disbelief. Less than. What did I do? Greater than. He rolled his eyes. Shouldn't an aura farmer be able to do anything? Even helping seemingly unhelpable cases? Less than. Indeed. Greater than. Snorting, Taka gave Hagakure a brief look. Not now, though, that's not gonna end well. Putting the idea for later, he glanced at the door, waiting patiently for All Might to give the announcement of the exercise's start. Hagakure did the same, calmly standing in silence. Then, it happened. Now, let's start the second combat match of today. All Might's loud voice rang in their earpiece, snapping both teams into alert. RAAAAAANG. Then, the loud honk that announced the match's start dropped, setting them into motion. Bear with this for a moment. Taka's red flaring aura wrapped around Toru, forcing her afloat without warning, earning slightly panicked sounds from her. Just as she was about to ask what that was about, however. TSSS's. In an instant, a wave of frost raised the whole building, covering walls, floor, and ceiling. What's this? What the? Hagakure, who had been floating, remained untouched save for the low temperatures that dropped with the coat of ice that now surrounded the building. Taka, however, got hit directly by the wave, and ice had crept up to his knees, trapping him to the ground. Taka, are you okay? Seeing his state, Hagakure asked panically from the air, squirming in panic. But Taka simply nodded, and then, crack, he snapped apart the ice trapping him with sheer strength. With that done, he set Hagakure down and cracked his neck. That should have done it for the first attack, he mumbled, eyes narrowing. Given the big range attack, Sato is probably out of the building right now, so there's no need to worry about him for now. Saying so, he began walking toward the room's door. Where are you going? Taka didn't answer right away. He opened the door and shot her a small look. To force a direct confrontation. To be continued. I am become author, creator of cliffhangers. 35 comments 0 vote. Aura vs Frost, and Punch. Aura vs Frost, and Punch. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Todoroki's heavy steps crushed the crystalline layer of ice coating the floor as he advanced through the mock building, swallowed by near total darkness, save for the few occasions a window appeared amidst the multiple corridors. Misty breath escaped his mouth with each exhale. With the ice now all around, the temperature in the whole building had dropped. However, he was resistant to cold. This level of temperature drop wasn't enough to faze him yet. Such were the benefits of his quirk. No, this was but the result of his own progress. Even freezing an entire building was effortless, and under normal circumstances, it would have been enough to deal with almost anyone. Yet, even after such a grand display of power, Todoroki hadn't lowered his guard. On the first day, he hadn't paid much attention to his classmates. UA's prestige, aside from being the best school available to him, didn't impress him. So, he hadn't expected much of a challenge from them either. He wasn't being arrogant. That mindset was simply the result of the relentless training he'd endured, training meant to ensure he wouldn't have to rely on that. To become the #1 hero and to prove his damn old man wrong, he had forced the ice side of his quirk to stand on its own, to make it powerful enough to stand as a sole quirk by itself. So when he rose as a hero, he would need only it, and not the other part. And for a long time, he'd believed he had succeeded. His ice output dwarfed that of similar quirks recorded throughout recent years. But it was during the quirk assessment test that he realized he'd miscalculated. Someone posed an actual threat to his objective, someone with an absurdly powerful quirk. And that same someone was now his opponent. Even after that initial wave of ice, fast and strong enough to catch almost anyone off guard, he wasn't certain it would have been enough to deal with him. Still, he hoped it could have accomplished something. He didn't know the specifics of the other boy's ability, but from what he'd gathered, it was a telekinetic-type quirk. A frighteningly potent one, but that meant the weak point was the user himself. This ice attack should have caught him by surprise. It was just that fast. It should have pinned his feet to the ground, at least momentarily. The telekinesis was strong enough to pull him out for sure. He didn't have a doubt about that. But as for protecting his feet from the damage that pulling them out from the burning cold ice would do, he wasn't so sure it'd be able to accomplish that. So, either the boy was still trapped after realizing the damage he would inflict on himself by trying to escape, or he had already broken free, regardless of it all. Todoroki wouldn't know until he reached the top floor. But hopefully, never mind. Todoroki scoffed. The stairway to the next floor had just come into view when a figure appeared, descending calmly toward him. Not a speck of ice on it. Shrouded in darkness, the figure looked like a vengeful ghost. The aggressive design of the costume and the mask, which hid most of his features, only worsened the effect. The only proof that the figure was human was the eyes beneath the brim of his hat, eyes currently looking down at Todoroki as he finished descending the stairs. Each step echoed sharply through the ice-filled hallway. Soon, they stood on the same level, meters apart, silently gauging each other's level. At least, you aren't coming, until the figure raised an arm and curled a finger toward himself. A blatant invitation to attack. Quote. Todoroki didn't hesitate. Bang, he stomped the floor, and waves of ice surged forward in unison, completely flooding the hallway as they rushed toward his opponent, looking like a violent flood of raw ice. Yet, swish, shatter, a single palm thrust from his opponent obliterated the oncoming ice before it could even reach him. The sheer wave of red telekinetic energy sent the shattered remains back past Todoroki, forcing the red and white-haired student to stumble a step as he shielded himself from the storm of frozen debris. He disregarded it so easily. Todoroki grit his teeth, squinting through the blizzard of his own ice as it flew back at him, refusing to lose sight of his opponent. Finally, the shockwave died down after a few seconds, allowing Todoroki to steady himself and stand upright once more. But when his eyes settled forward again, all he saw was another finger beckoning him. This guy, his eyebrows furrowed. Without hesitation, he attacked again. This time, with less restraint. Boom, a massive surge of ice erupted outward, swallowing the hallway whole and tearing apart the surrounding walls. The entire building trembled under the sheer force of it, the explosion of ice roaring as it expanded across the floor uncontrolled. And this time, his opponent didn't block. The ice surged forward unabated, and, eventually, swallowed him whole. The dark figure vanished beneath layers of ice, completely encased. Quote. For a fleeting moment, a glint of regret flashed through Todoroki's eyes. Was his telekinetic ability perhaps limited by a cooldown or something else that hadn't allowed him to block? Had he actually gravely injured one of his classmates because he got too into it? Those thoughts crept into his mind as he stared at the motionless, frozen figure. Until a sound reached him. Crack, the sound of ice parting. And soon, it was not only that. His eyes followed each crack, each fissure. Until he realized it. They all came from the guy at the center of it all. Shatter. In an instant, most of the ice that had engulfed the hallway, and shattered the walls in the process, exploded outward, blasting chunks of frozen debris clean off the building. Somehow, all missing Todoroki in the process. And there, amidst the falling shards, reflecting the surroundings like fragments of shattered reality, stood his opponent. Unshaken and clearly unbothered by such a move, and he made it clear by raising a single finger. You get one more try. His voice echoed through the now widened hallway, commanding, despite the clear taunt. Todoroki's teeth ground together, frustration boiling beneath the surface. He hadn't come this far for his efforts to hit a wall on the second day of classes. He couldn't lose. If he did, then he'd be proving that bastard of a father right. That, without his fire, there was little he could accomplish. And that, he couldn't allow. Focusing back on his opponent, anger surged in the depths of his being. So, Todoroki abandoned all restraint. This opponent was clearly stronger than him. There was only one answer for this. He had to go all out. To prove he didn't need his father. To prove to himself that his efforts hadn't been in vain. To prove to everyone that his ice was all he could ever need, to reach the top. "You want an attack," he muttered, his usual composure cracking as raw frustration twisted his expression. "Then how about this?" He dropped to one knee, both hands slamming against the floor. Thud, and then, it happened in an instant. TSSSSSS. An ice explosion, not one meant to merely coat walls or freeze surfaces. This was ice meant to consume everything. The expansion was terrifying, erupting from Todoroki's position and swallowing most of the floor in less than a blink, with no intention of stopping there. The entire building was about to be entombed in sheer frost. That's what should have happened. Bang! But the monstrous wave of ice didn't make it far beyond the floor. As if seized by an invisible force field, the advancing mass slammed into something midair, and simply stopped. The ice groaned like a roaring beast, pushing and agonizing to grow beyond that, but failing completely. Todoroki's eyes widened, confusion flooding his mind at the sudden halt. Then, it became even worse. Like a chain reaction, the compressed ice, straining to expand but denied by the unseen force, began to crack. The sound of what had once been a mighty attack collapsing from inside filled the entire vicinity. CRK. His head whipped around, watching the ice formation all around become filled with fissures. One of his most powerful attacks, stopped, and destroyed, just like that. Then, as if to confirm his disbelief, shatter. It finally collapsed, breaking apart into several fragments. But they didn't fall. Under Todoroki's stunned gaze, tons upon tons of frozen debris hung suspended in the air. Almost mystically. Then, slowly, they began to circle around him, forming a swirling storm of ice. He glanced around, startled by what was happening, danger alarms screaming in his mind. What was his opponent trying to do? Was he about to turn all that ice against him? He had to react, maybe erect an ice wall before he could. "That was your last try. Time's up." The voice came from behind him. Todoroki's eyes widened. In a flash, he spun around and lashed out, sending a wave of ice forward. Crash! The ice barely traveled a few centimeters before shattering in place. But he didn't stop. More ice surged forth under Todoroki's relentless lash-out as he took his distance. Each wave, weaker than the last, and each one was effortlessly crushed by the unseen force before it could even come close to its target, who calmly walked after him. Todoroki's breathing grew ragged, his muscles trembling as the cold gnawed at him. He was reaching his limit. Without using his fire to regulate his body temperature, pushing any further meant crossing into dangerous territory. I must not. He swung his arm once more. Tack, only for his wrist to be caught mid-motion. For a brief moment, silence fell between the two contenders. Todoroki was too exhausted, and too cold, to say anything. And the boy in front of him seemed to pause, as if lost in thought. Then, just as the moment stretched, the boy in black tilted his head. "You thought you could half-ass this?" The words struck something deep. "What?" Todoroki snapped, despite his weary condition. For a moment, silence fell again, the boy's eyes locking with Todoroki's in a sharp gaze. "You're aiming for the top, aren't you?" Todoroki didn't answer, whether from disbelief or simple refusal, only known to him. Regardless, the boy took the silence as agreement. And so, he let out a mocking snort. "You didn't think you'd reach it by half-assing your way through it, did you? What do you even? An incomplete person can never hope to defeat me." Exclamation mark quote. As if Todoroki's response no longer mattered, the boy released him. Then, wham! A surge of telekinetic force slammed Todoroki into a nearby, untouched wall. Before he could recover, a binding wrapped tightly around his wrist, the one they'd been given for the exercise. His eyes snapped to the binding in bafflement. Just like that, Todoroki had been disqualified. Huffing softly, the boy turned away, shoving both hands into his pockets as he began to walk off. His business here was finished. Or so it seemed. Wait, Todoroki's voice stopped him. The boy turned, casting a sideways glance. Your name, Todoroki said, forcing the words out. What was it? Silence stretched between them once more. Then, Takahashi, or Taka, pick whichever you like, and with that, he turned his back again, heading toward the stairwell leading down. In search of his next prey. Degree. Taka's pav. That fucker didn't even bother learning my name. I clicked my tongue as I descended another flight of stairs, briefly wondering if I should have gone harder on him. He'd earned a couple more whacks to the head. Forget it, he got humiliated more than enough for today. Rolling my eyes, I set my irritation aside and focused instead on the seeds I'd planted. I wonder if that worked. My thoughts drifted back to the last words I'd thrown Todoroki's way. I'd kinda gotten inspired by Midoriya's future Taknojutsu, the one that finally got Todoroki to stop caring about his old man and start using his fire. Of course, mine had been far cruder, shorter, and way more condescending than anything the greenhead would ever say. But hey, I wasn't about to sit him down and give him a heartfelt pep talk about self-acceptance and daddy issues. That wasn't part of my act, or who I was. Sure, I could try to improvise something convincing. With true voice and all, it'd probably sound decent. But it'd just be random fluff without real meaning. So I went the competitive route. Either he stops holding back, or he never beats me. My main objective was to get him to drop his limiter fast, so he could start climbing in strength right away. Why? Because the stronger he gets, the stronger I look in comparison. Maybe it was a crude method. But if it worked, it worked. That, or he becomes Endeavor 2.0, and I end up being his all might. On second thought, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe this was how villain Todoroki started. Yeah, maybe I should deploy Midoriya to do his magic, just to be safe. I was still mulling that over when I reached the next lower floor, and ran into an unexpected sight. There he was, Rikido Sato. Mr. Diabetes is my superpower himself. The moment he saw me, his expression went flat, followed immediately by a nervous sweat drop. I figured something was going on up there, he said cautiously. But given the scale of it, I didn't dare step in. So, you beat Todoroki, huh? I nodded, no point lying about his partner's unfortunate fate. He grimaced and let out a heavy sigh. Then just finish me off. I won't even be able to reach you before you blow me away anyway. I hummed. That was indeed fully true, but I checked the timer on my phone. 5 minutes, I muttered. He asked, confused. I raised my hand, palm forward, all 5 fingers extended. How about this? For the next 5 minutes, I won't use my telekinesis. Until then, you can show the teacher everything you've got. I'd let Todoroki attack me 3 times, not just because of the massive aura gains that tanking all his attacks like nothing would get me, but because this was an exercise. All Might was supposed to point out flaws, give feedback, all that educational stuff. After this, Oni-shotting everyone without letting them show anything would have been kinda mean. Even though that was exactly what Todoroki did to the team he fought in the show. But I was better than him, wasn't I? So I'd give this guy the same chance. Let the guy show his stuff, then let All Might handle the critique. And while I was at it, I could aura farm by proving I wasn't just amazing because of my quirk. Powerful and responsible, truly, I am an exemplary aura farmer. Less than if someone could hear your thoughts, you'd be losing aura in real time. Greater than. But no one can. Let me be. This aura farming crap is exhausting, I should at least be allowed to relax in my own head. For real. Sato's voice snapped me back to reality. I cleared my throat. Yeah, saying so, I took off my coat and tossed it aside. Clang. The instant it hit the metal floor, the surface bent slightly under the impact. Sato's eyes widened like saucers. That's weighted clothing. Indeed, it wasn't. I'd just used my aura to force the coat down and slam it into the floor. But he didn't need to know that. I guess even without your quirk, you're no pushover, huh? Just my luck. Sato smirked nervously, but he didn't back away from the challenge. Instead, he pulled a packet of sugar from the belt of his hero suit and swallowed it without hesitation. His body swelled, muscles bulging as his strength skyrocketed. Good. Come, I beckoned. And he did. Arg, he roared as he charged. His lunge was fast, powered more by brute strength than technique, but compared to Seiji, who had both power and agility, this was easy. A fist nearly touched my nose by mere centimeters as I took a single step back, already knowing it wouldn't reach. Another punch followed. I weaved past it, slipped under his guard, and ended up right behind him. He reacted quickly, throwing a blind punch backward. I dodged by leaning back into a limbo, the blow passing just inches from my nose. He turned around and threw. Another punch, weave. Then another, weave, and then another, right, yeah. I'd momentarily forgotten the side effect of his quirk. I weaved again and, wham, I planted a punch of my own into him, knocking him back a few steps. As he staggered in surprise, I spoke. Snap out of it, I commanded, my voice low and firm. If you don't think while fighting, you're gonna get folded by the first random villain you find. Despite being in his dulled state, my words seemed to get through. He scrunched his face, visibly struggling to process them and apply them. Seeing that, I beckoned again. So he charged. Punch, punch, punch. No, that was a headbutt. I still dodged it, though it caught me off guard. That's an improvement, I guess. Another punch, then another, and again another. He sure was struggling with thinking in that state. As the repetition continued, I started punishing him harder for it. Another punch, I dodged and countered with a strike of my own. Another, I kicked him before he could even reach me. Another, and this time I redirected his arm and landed a clean gut punch. The fight went on like that for a while. Eventually, new attacks started to appear. He was learning, slowly, but there was progress. Which made sense, given he was trying to learn how to fight while stuck in a cognitively dulled state. Still, when I checked the time, I squinted. Only 1 minute left, then, we'd win automatically. But, winning by default is kinda lame, right? I thought, noticing something on the current floor that made me decide on how to end this combat properly. With my decision made, Sato lunged in with an uppercut, and I slipped behind him. He tried to turn, and to his credit, he did. But before he could react, I thrust my palm into his chest, this time putting a bit more force into it. That sent him skidding several steps back until he finally forced himself to a stop. For a moment, he looked ready to keep fighting, but just as he moved to charge again. Click. The sound of binding bands snapping shut echoed through the room. Sato yelped, staring at his now immobilized wrists. You lied. You said you wouldn't use your telekinesis. I snorted. That wasn't me. Huh, he, it was I, Toru. You forgot I was here, didn't you? A voice rang out from midair, near him. Sato's jaw dropped. No way. While Hagakure reveled in her sneak attack and Sato realized how thoroughly he'd been played, I bent down, picked up my coat, and slipped it back on, letting it flap in the process for extra coolness. The dust it had picked off disappeared instantly. And just as I finished, the lane team wins, All Might's slightly baffled voice came to our earpieces. I broke into a smile from behind my mask. That's what I'm talking about, baby. To be continued. Almost there, just one assignment more and I'll be free. 26 comments 0 vote. After battle. Minutes later, both teams made their return to the monitoring room not long after All Might's announcement. Though it was immediately clear that only one of them had been truly successful. While Toru seemed to vibrate with excitement, even if she wasn't visible, and Taka looked strangely satisfied behind his usual poker face, the other team presented the complete opposite picture. Sato looked nervous, his eyes constantly dodging All Might's gaze. He was clearly beaten up and exhausted from the fight. Todoroki was worse. He wasn't nearly as physically battered as Sato, but his expression was a tangled mix of frustration, dejection, and something close to shock. And threaded through it all was anger, channeled into a sharp glare aimed straight at Taka. All in all, it was painfully obvious who the victors were. Not that Class 1A needed to guess. They had all watched it unfold firsthand on the big screen, albeit without audio. It had been an utter defeat for the heroes. A strange one, however. Even All Might seemed to think so, judging by the faintly confused look on his face. Still, he had a job to do. Very good work out there, young ones, he praised, stepping forward and giving Todoroki's shoulder a gentle tap. You fought bravely and showed great promise. The boy acknowledged the gesture only briefly, glancing up at him for a second before his gaze fell back to the floor. Sighing softly, All Might turned to the rest of the class. Now then, Can anyone guess who the MVP was this time? Instantly, nearly every pair of eyes turned toward Taka. He remained impassive, arms crossed, and eyes closed, though he was probably fist-pumping internally. Yaoyorozu raised her hand, though unlike during the first combat exercise, there was a hint of hesitation in her movement. Was it, Hagakure-san, perhaps? That answer seemed to surprise everyone. Everyone except Taka, who didn't react in the slightest. All Might, for his part, didn't correct her. Instead, he simply nodded. Could you explain your reasoning, young Yaoyorozu? Well, Yaoyorozu began, glancing apologetically at Taka. While Takahashi-san was undoubtedly the one who defeated the hero team and secured victory, I believe he committed several errors that, in any real scenario, would have been dangerous or illogical for villains, or any combatant for that matter, to make. Taka met her look and gave her a curt nod. Seeing that he didn't object, she continued. First, he allowed his opponents to attack first when, judging by his capabilities, he could have apprehended them in minutes, if not less. Second, he abandoned his role of securing the bomb and his partner to pursue combat. If Sato-san had taken an alternate route or climbed the building from the outside, Hagakure-san would have been forced to deal with him alone, leaving both herself and the bomb vulnerable. She then turned toward Hagakure, who was a bit startled upon receiving her gaze, pointing at herself baffledly. In contrast, Hagakure-san remained by the bomb for a significant amount of time, properly assessing the situation before deciding whether to descend and assist or ambush whatever awaited below. She remained faithful to the objective of the exercise. Finally, she glanced at the two defeated members of the hero team, her expression turning slightly wry. As for Todoroki-san and Sato-san, they both committed notable mistakes. Todoroki-san chose to engage alone, which led to his defeat, when the two of them could have worked together to overcome Takahashi-san. He also risked detonating the bomb by recklessly damaging the surroundings. Sato-san, on the other hand, remained inactive for too long despite the limited time, and in the end committed a similar mistake by engaging in combat when there were only a few minutes more to go by. All Might nodded thoughtfully, then turned his attention to Taka. Those are indeed serious mistakes, young Takahashi. Even if your power allows you to overwhelm your opponents, such overconfidence could easily allow them to seize the advantage in a more serious battlefield, and as a future hero, allowing villains to gain an advantage is a grave mistake. Can you explain why you chose that approach? Taka didn't bat an eye before the reproach. Instead, he answered calmly. It wasn't really part of the initial strategy. Then, he tilted his head casually. This was an exercise. Preventing my classmates from being evaluated by ending the battle in a single move would have defeated the purpose of the exercise for them. So I allowed them to show what they were capable of before deciding to end either fight. He let the words linger for a few seconds, allowing them to sink in. Even though it had been obvious from the footage, hearing them from Taka himself did stir bafflement from the class. After all, Todoroki had been clearly very strong. Yet, even after their fight, Taka was stating he had allowed the fight to go on of his own volition. The confidence he was oozing was overwhelming. Is he serious? Damn, I'd hate to be Todoroki right now. Just what is his quirk? The class was already struggling to take his words in. But then, Taka dropped another bomb. His eyes sharpened, and his tone grew heavier, his costume amplifying the sudden weight of his presence. If this had been real, I would have ended at the instant the alarm rang. A few surprised gasps escaped the room at the boast. Yet no one objected, no one called it arrogance. After the display they had just witnessed, not a single person found it in themselves to doubt his words. If he had wanted, he could have indeed brought the exercise to an end in a brief moment. Sato scratched the back of his head, visibly embarrassed at hearing, out loud, that he'd only been given a chance to fight so he could be evaluated properly. Even if he already knew it. Todoroki, however, reacted differently. His expression tightened as the true reason he'd been allowed to fight back settled in. A single question echoed in his mind. If Taka had attacked first, would he have even been able to respond? In a real fight, would he have stood a chance at all? As Todoroki brooded over the thought, his heart heavy, All Might nodded, a wry smile forming as he looked at Taka. Taking your classmates into consideration is a wonderful quality, young Takahashi. However, from now on, especially as these tests grow harsher, don't forget to take care of yourself as well. You came to this institution to learn, did you not? Taka huffed softly, but nodded. Satisfied, All Might turned his attention to Hagakure. As for you, young Hagakure, just like young Yaoyorozu pointed out, you were the one who remained most faithful to the objective of the exercise. For that, I must commend you. He. It was nothing. Toru laughed, her index finger brushing under where her nose would be in unmistakable smugness. At least, that's what seemed she was doing. She was invisible, after all. Then, All Might turned toward the losing team, his expression shifting into something more complex. As for you, young men, don't forget that today is only the second day of school. While your performances weren't stellar, that simply means you have plenty of potential left to develop. Todoroki nodded absent-mindedly. Sato, however, clenched his fists, his expression pensive as he stared down at them. Yes, today, I realize there's more to fighting than just raw strength. He then turned toward Taka, who blinked, slightly startled by the sudden attention, and bowed deeply. Thanks, man, without you, who knows how long it would have taken me to figure that out. Sure, Taka waved him off, sweat dropping inwardly. I was just aura farming you, man. No need to be grateful at all. He might have also released some pent-up frustration from his earlier training sessions with Seiji. Being the one doing the whooping instead of getting whooped was a strange experience, but definitely not an unpleasant one. Still, if he feels like he learned something from it, then I guess it wasn't all that bad in the end, Taka thought, mentally excusing himself. With the evaluation complete, the next team soon stepped forward for their respective matches. Taka could have acted uninterested. With his current level, and his experience in battle, watching the newly appointed heroes was a bit like watching someone with zero experience trying to look like they knew what they were doing. Not exactly thrilling, and yet, that was precisely why he watched most of the matches with a sharp, analytical gaze. Too weak. They were all weaker than he had expected. Maybe that was only natural. They were just starting school, after all. Or maybe this was the real-life effect kicking in. In anime, everything always looked more epic than it actually was. And if that were the case, then the same applied to his classmates and their quirks. As powerful, prodigious, or outright superhuman as some of them appeared during certain moments in the show, how many of those scenes were simply dramatic exaggeration rather than a reflection of their true capabilities, or what had actually happened? Crazy techniques, unnatural speed, abnormal strength. That worked in anime, meant to hype up viewers, but nothing guaranteed that those feats translated cleanly into reality. Of course, he didn't doubt that some of his classmates would eventually scale to great heights. But from what he was seeing now, some of them had been far more hyped than they deserved. And that bothered Taka. I wanted to create a gap, sure, but this is too much, isn't it? He thought, glaring at his classmates' matches with a wry look. His total aura might have ended up being a bit too much. As they were right now, they were simply too weak. Which, on its own, wasn't necessarily a bad thing. After all, weakness makes strength stand out. But you know what makes it stand out even more? Collective strength. Surpassing the weak, no matter how large their numbers, is a given for anyone with enough strength. But standing at the top among the strong, that could only be achieved by someone truly powerful. And right now, they were far too weak for that. Taka sighed, shaking his head. His gaze drifted to Sato, who had thanked him earlier for helping him realize his own flaws. Then to Hagakure, whom he had considered helping unlock her visible form, and thus embark her on a path to develop actual clothes for her quirk. Then, to Todoroki, who remained staring at the floor, lost deep in thought. A more delicate case, sure, but Taka had wanted him to reach his full potential for the same reason as the others. Finally, his eyes shifted to the screen, where Midoriya was currently fighting, fortunately not against Bakugo like in the show. His form was sloppy, his physique barely passable. His combat instincts resembled those of a Chunobu convinced he could plan 10 steps ahead, even as a punch was flying straight at his face. He, the protagonist, was the biggest future threat to Taka's aura farming. But he was also the one who could make Taka shine the most, once he proved himself unchallenged even by him, the wielder of One for All. The sports festival would be in a month or two, if Taka remembered correctly. If he fought a Midoriya like this, it wouldn't be much of a spectacle. But if he fought an actually trained Midoriya, one who could fight without destroying himself, and in front of all Japan, that would be a literal reign of aura. And the same logic applied to everyone else. If he stood out as the strongest in their class, it would be a bit inspiring, sure. But if all his classmates were strong as heck by the time the festival happened, and he stood as the strongest, then that could make it much better. That was enough to form the idea completely in Taka's mind. He had accidentally made the gap in power a bit too large. So why not help them narrow it a little, if only to widen it even more later? Maybe I'm biting off more than I can chew here. Helping an entire class reach their true potential faster than they did in the show won't be easy, especially since I'm no specialist or anything. He paused, but giving up the chance to Aura farm more isn't something an Aura farmer would ever do. He huffed, closing his eyes as a small smile tugged at his lips. I'm sorry about this, y'all, but... His eyes snapped open, scanning everyone with a greedy glint. You're all gonna become heck strong, whether you like it or not. For the sake of my Aura farming. Suddenly, a shiver ran down everyone's spine. They glanced around, uneasy, but all they saw was Taka leaning coolly against a wall, eyes closed and expression relaxed. And so, they never noticed the anomaly. If only they had, they might have been able to skip the suffering coming ahead. For the Aura farming path was never easy, even for those unaware of it. Degree. An hour or so later. Once everyone finished their matches, they received a few general pointers from All Might, and the class came to an end. After a quick visit to the lockers to change back into their usual uniforms, the students returned to the classroom to await the last lesson of the day. Taka, of course, was the last to arrive. Slam. The classroom door snapped open as he entered. Contrary to his expectations, however, no one turned to look. The room remained lively, students chatting, laughing, or busy finding ways to kill time before the final class. They're adapting, he thought grimly. It seemed he was gonna have to think of other ways to gather attention to himself from now on. He was just about to head to his seat, slightly dejected, when... Yo, Taka, you were amazing out there, man. Kirishima's voice rang out, his hand raised in invitation to come. Might as well talk with someone instead of acting like I'm meditating for who knows how long until our last teacher arrives. Figuring he had no Aura farming ideas left for the remainder of the school day, Taka shrugged and walked over. Only then did he notice it wasn't just Kirishima. A whole group had gathered around the nearby desks: Mina, Shiro, Jiro, Sato, Tsuyu, Kirishima, and Toru. Before he could even reach them, however, Invisible Girl herself stepped forward. Hee, good job out there, Taka, she said cheerfully, raising her hand for a high five. Taka paused for a moment, then indulged her. He was an Aura farmer, not an asshole. Tap, he met her hand cleanly. Whoa, that was a really solid high five, she exclaimed, half excited, half baffled. Taka gave her a puzzled look. Seeing his expression, she laughed awkwardly. Hee, I don't usually get such dead-on high fives, or, hand contact in general. Invisibility and all. Taka nodded, unfazed. It wasn't that hard. His aura had somewhat pinpointed the location, after all. With that settled, he went and joined the rest of the group, Toru following from behind silently. As soon as he arrived, the first to speak was his opponent from earlier. Sup, man, we didn't really get to introduce ourselves earlier. I'm Sato, the big guy said, offering a fist bump. Taka met it lightly. Takahashi, or Taka. Sato barely had time to nod before a pink-haired girl popped up between them. You were awesome earlier. Just, peesh and whoosh, right through those crazy ice attacks. I'm Mina Ishido, by the way. Nice to meet ya. Likewise, call me Takahashi, or Taka. Taka nodded, fully agreeing with her assessment of his awesomeness. And I'm Shiro Hanta, another voice chimed in, the boy pointing at himself with his thumb. Next to him, someone else followed suit. Denki Kaminari, nice to meet you, man. A girl leaned in. I'm Tsuyu, you can call me Sue. Taka nodded vaguely at each of them. Taka, he introduced himself vaguely, starting to get tired of repeating himself. With introductions out of the way, Kirishima stepped forward again. We were talking about the exercise earlier, and your name kept coming up, he said, clenching his fist with passion. Man, you really made an impression. I've never seen anything like that. Mina jumped in place, nodding enthusiastically. Yeah, it was insane. Yeah, just what is your quirk, man? Shiro asked, eyes wide. Some kind of crazy, overpowered telekinesis. No, I don't think that's it, Sato chimed in, rubbing a spot where he'd been hit earlier, even though it had already healed. He hit hard even without using his quirk. We asked Jiro, Toru added, sounding mildly exasperated, but she said we should just ask you ourselves. Taka glanced toward Jiro. She was leaning casually against a desk, smiling. We weren't sure about approaching you at first, Suyu said thoughtfully, finger resting against her lips. You're kind of intimidating, but you turned out to be nicer than expected, Ribbit. Jiro shrugged, giving the group a told you so look. See, I said he wasn't all that. Whoa. She yelped as the desk she was leaning against suddenly shook. Instantly, her eyes snapped toward Taka. Taka, meanwhile, was averting his eyes from her, facing Shiro. My quirk is called muscle to mind, Taka spoke evenly, expression impassive. It converts physical strength directly into pure telekinetic energy that I can control. The gasp was collective. Suyu was the first to recover, tilting her head faintly. No offense, Taka-kun, but just call me Taka. Then, Taka, she corrected herself. But your appearance doesn't really match the level of telekinesis you showed. Taka nodded in understanding. Jiro did the same, earning herself another desk shake that made her yelp and shoot him a sharp glare. He ignored it and continued. My quirk also enhances my body's limits. My physical strength isn't bound by normal human constraints, and since my telekinesis scales off that, neither is it. He lifted a fist, clenching it slowly. A red aura wrapped around it, dense and controlled. It wasn't like this at first. But after enough training, both my strength and my telekinesis reached this level. That's crazily manly, Kirishima muttered, a single tear slipping down the corner of his eye. So that's why you're so skilled, Sato said, nodding as he recalled the beating he'd received earlier. His expression turned thoughtful. Training. The rest of the group nodded, a mix of awe and dawning understanding settling in. So that's why you felt stronger than when we first met, Jiro commented, recalling that peculiar day. Taka nodded vaguely. You two went to the same school, right? Mina asked, even though she already knew the answer from Jiro. She just wanted to hear it confirmed. Both nodded. Something lit up in Mina's eyes. So how did you two meet? That question formed a smirk on Jiro's face. As if she had just recalled something incredibly funny. I was walking home one day when I saw this guy. Screech. Her speech was cut short as the desk she was leaning on shook noticeably this time, like in an earthquake, making Jiro yelp as she grabbed onto it for balance. As soon as it finished, though, she shot Taka a venomous glare. Taka, however, ignored her and spoke in her place. She butted into something I already had under control. After that, we stayed in contact. As UA got closer, we ended up talking more. Jiro looked like she wanted to argue, but before she could. She also kept pestering me obsessively about this guy all the time, like she was his fanji. Stop, Jiro screamed, panic flashing across her face. Taka narrowed his eyes at her, his meaning crystal clear. Mind what you say, or I won't mind what I say. She sweat dropped and shot back a silent, got it, look. Satisfied, Taka huffed. He couldn't let the beating he'd taken that day stain his current reputation, even if the punks involved had ended up far worse. And as for Jiro, while she still followed Rakunes's account religiously, she absolutely couldn't let her new classmates see her as some kind of unhinged fangirl on the second day of school. Still, it seemed the topic wasn't quite over yet. You two are from Shizuoka, right? Mina asked, curiosity lighting her eyes. They nodded once more. Then, wait, are you talking about Rakunes's? Mina suddenly exclaimed, visibly excited. I heard he's from there. The question startled Jiro. She'd assumed they would just gloss over Taka's earlier words. Had she been caught? Rakunes's, Kirishima repeated, eyes lighting up. That guy's super manly. You listen to him too, Ashido. Kaminari cut in, equally excited as he looked between Kirishima and Mina. Wait, you guys are fans too? Of course, Kirishima pumped his fist. That guy's basically the embodiment of manliness. I wasn't a huge fan at first, Mina admitted, rubbing the back of her head shyly. But his music kinda grew on me over time. I think I've heard of him, Suyu said thoughtfully, tapping her chin. Wasn't he a vigilante who got popular recently? Oh, that guy, Sato nodded, suddenly animated. I didn't really follow him, but I remember liking that song that blew up. Ah, that Rakunes's guy, I've got all his songs on my playlist. Toru cheered, excitedly. Yeah, same, Shiro added, squinting as if digging through his memory. I feel like I hear his stuff pretty often. This time, Jiro, who had seemed completely reserved about the topic, leaned in instead, eyes wide in excitement. So you all like him too? She said, grinning. That's sick. Just like that, the conversation derailed completely, turning into an impromptu discussion about Rockinesis. Leaving Taka standing there, feeling more than a little awkward. How do I walk away from this? He wondered grimly. I really don't want to hear people talk about me like this. Sure, he loved to hear people praising him and all. But the thought that these people didn't know they were talking about a guy who was literally standing right beside them was giving him some serious secondhand embarrassment. So much so that some must have slipped through his poker face. Quote. Noticing the slight discomfort, Toru tilted her head, to the unawareness of everyone, and asked Taka. What's wrong, Taka? You don't like him? Ah. Taka snapped out of his daze, realizing his blunder. Instantly, all eyes had settled on him. Scratching the back of his head, he lied through his teeth. I don't care much about him, he said, not looking particularly interested in the conversation. You don't? That caused outrage in the group, of those more passionate, at least. How can you not? His music is godly, Kaminari asked, exasperated. Yeah, and besides, have you seen the moves he pulls off in his shows? They're crazy, Mina chimed in, looking at him as if he were a lunatic. Not liking him is, like, unmanly, man. Kirishima struggled to come up with a proper protest. Jiro simply shook his head. I should have gone to my seat. Taka thought grimly. Fortunately, soon his savior appeared. Slam. The door opened, and a familiar, unkempt figure stepped into the classroom. Silence. All of you, to your seats, now. Aizawa commanded, making everyone instantly scramble back to their desks. I will never forget this, teacher. As he escaped the torture, Taka thanked him in his mind, settling on his seat with a content poker face. To be continued. Lots of interaction this chapter, so it was a pain to write. Hopefully, nothing seemed off. Maybe just that I repeated myself a bit too much. Also, it ended up extra long. Hopefully, that doesn't mean it ended up boring as well. Luckily, with the plans I set in Taka's mind, it wasn't. Anyway, see you next chapter. 27 comments 0 vote. Class representative. Class representative. 2 days after yesterday. Collective sigh. Why the heck are you all sighing? Taka asked flatly, glaring around the room with a deadpan expression. Scattered across his room, several clones were sprawled wherever space allowed, on the bed, at his desk, and even on the floor. Each of them held a book on a different subject, math, biology, Quirk history, and more. Their expressions, however, were anything but pleasant. Why else? You're making us do the boring stuff. Yeah, why the heck do we have to study? We could be doing so much more, yet here we are, forced to do your responsibilities. The clones raised their fists in collective protest. Taka's eyebrow twitched. You're my clones. Why are you all so damn pesky? You're literally me, you should know exactly why this needs to be done. Yeah, you can't afford to fall behind. Mr. Ora Farmer almost got his ass handed to him by a math question yesterday. Boo-hoo. Taka pinched the bridge of his nose, massaging his temple. Do I secretly hate myself or something? Why is it that every time I make clones, they immediately start roasting me? One of them smirked. It's just fun to mess with you, man. Since you're the original, we feel entitled to blame you for every cringe thing we've ever done. But you're literally me. Yeah, but since we're external now, we can finally bully our worst enemy since we were born. Ourselves, as in you. Taka gave them all a deadfish stare. System, are you sure my clones aren't faulty or something? Less than clones are an exact copy of you. Whatever it is that being aware their existence is a clone doing to them, that's on greater than. Whatever. Taka shook his head helplessly, waving the system off, before turning to the clones. I'm heading to school now. Y'all better study properly, or at least go mess with Seiji together. I'm sure that'll be a fun memory for me to receive later. Ho ho, the original has a point. Wouldn't that be funny as heck? He's still sleeping, isn't he? Imagine his reaction if we swarmed his room with all of us. As his clones began seriously considering swarming downstairs to gang up on Seiji, Taka grabbed his backpack and opened the window. Swoosh. In the next second, he shot upward into the sky. As his figure sliced through the open air like a distant blur, unnoticed by most, mistaken for a bird by others, his thoughts drifted toward what awaited him today. Third day of UA, what was supposed to happen today, according to canon? Taka rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The first 2 days had stuck clearly in his memory, given their relevance in aura farming. Not long after them was supposed to happen the USJ incident, which was literally the aura farming moment. But what happened in between? Taka couldn't answer outright. It wasn't memorable enough. Actually, when was the USJ incident supposed to happen? Next week, tomorrow. Troublesome. He clicked his tongue. He regretted not having written the plot down somewhere to keep it fresh. A full year had passed since his old life had merged with this one, and the show's minor details were slowly blurring with time. Humming irritably, he pressed a finger to his temple and continued flying, searching his memory as best he could, occasionally getting distracted by the scenery below, or by passing birds that shot him confused glances. A few minutes later, he reached Tokyo, descending swiftly yet silently into a sparsely inhabited area suitable for landing. Seconds later, as his feet kissed the earth, Taka sighed, realizing he'd completely lost track of whatever he'd been thinking about. Well, I guess I'll figure it out as it goes. He shrugged it off. Whatever was supposed to happen today clearly hadn't been important enough to stick in his memory. So, whatever it was, he'd just do what he always did best. Aura farm. With that resolve, Taka began speeding toward UA, sticking to empty alleyways to avoid trouble, or worse, awkward questions from the police about why a student was moving at inhuman speeds. Eventually, he reached the building. However, instead of the usual open gate leading inside with a few students passing through, a massive crowd stood clustered beside it, completely blocking the way. The press. Taka recognized them instantly, eyes squinting. He'd had more than enough encounters with them as Rakanessus, never direct, but certainly unpleasant enough. Though it wasn't like those meetings were needed to recognize them. The cameras, microphones, and scared students being interrogated made it obvious enough. He huffed quietly, already anticipating the annoying pestering that would inevitably come his way if he tried to walk through them. For a moment, he considered how to avoid drawing their attention altogether. But then he blinked, a cold realization settling in his heart. I don't need to do anything. His eyes narrowed at the thought. His aura, though invisible, flared outward, oozing raw intimidation. The air itself seemed to tighten as his red eyes gleamed faintly, light trailing within them. They'll move on their own. With that thought, he stepped forward. Step. The sound of that single footstep drew the reporters' attention immediately. Like hungry wolves, they all turned toward him, cameras lifting, mouths opening, ready to pounce and unleash a barrage of questions. But the instant they took a step toward the approaching Taka, they froze. All the courage and practiced insensitivity they'd built over years of trampling boundaries as reporters vanished in an instant. Apprehension crept into their bodies as they watched the figure of a seemingly ordinary teenager approach, his expression utterly dismissive. Some of them stepped back without realizing it, instinctively clearing a path. Others struggled against their terror, forcing their legs to move, ordering their mouths to speak and to do their job. But to no avail. The youth simply walked straight through the stunned crowd, calm and unbothered, his gaze never wavering. And then, before they knew it, he had already passed the gate. Gone from there completely, leaving only baffled murmurs and shocked curses. Hey, easy peasy. Having passed through the army of reporters, Taka smirked and calmly made his way toward his classroom, all while keeping a careful eye on the time to ensure he'd still arrive last. His classmates might have grown used to it, but that didn't mean he had to stop with the theatrics. So, a minute or so later, slam, he opened the door and strode inside. Unlike yesterday, however, this time a few heads turned. Not because he was especially imposing today, but likely because he'd grown more familiar with his classmates after yesterday's events. Yo, Taka, Kirishima waved enthusiastically from the middle rows. Sato did the same from the back of the class. Others reacted more subtly. Jiro glanced at him with mild amusement. Kaminari attempted some strange, awkward arm gesture that didn't quite qualify as a greeting. Mina, Tsuyu, and Siro offered short waves. Taka acknowledged them all with a single nod as he moved down the front of the classroom toward the last row of seats. At the front of that row sat Hagakure. As he passed her seat, he gave a brief nod. Her sleeve fluttered in response for a moment, most likely a wave, before settling again. A few steps farther in was Bakugo. Taka walked past him without so much as a glance. Bakugo, on the other hand, was not so calm, sending a glare that most likely would burn 1,000 death threats in paper if it had been heat vision. Taka, however, didn't even spare him a glance. Next came Midoriya. The green-haired boy stiffened as Taka passed, fingers fidgeting against his desk. His eyes flicked up for half a second before snapping back down. Taka's eyes remained on his own desk throughout it all. Finally, the aura farmer reached his seat, the second to last in the row. As he sat down, he tilted his head just enough to acknowledge Yaoyorozu behind him. "Good morning, Takahashi-san," she said with a polite nod. "Sup," he replied curtly, maintaining his poker face. With greetings done, he dropped into his seat and let out a quiet sigh, closing his eyes and preparing to wait calmly in mock meditation for the start of the class. That was, until he felt a gaze from his side. Quote, question mark, quote. His eyes opened in confusion. Turning his head, he found Tokiyami shooting him a sideways look. The hell? Taka was about to ponder if he had done something to offend the bird-headed classmate, but before he could even consider it, Tokiyami gave him a short nod before facing forward again. And just like that, their first interaction since school started was over. What's this guy's deal? Taka thought flatly, not quite understanding what that exchange had been about. Still, he returned the nod just in case Tokiyami was watching from his peripheral vision, then stared ahead again. And thus, with most of the class greeted, Taka went back to his mock meditation, closing his eyes, or that was the plan, until he caught sight of a messy green head of curls blocking most of his view of the front rows. As his eyes lingered on it, the plans he'd considered yesterday resurfaced. So, with no aura to farm until class started, he decided to check on them again. Right, I said I was gonna make this class stronger than in the show, didn't I? He thought, eyes going to the side in thought. But how the hell do I even start? Midoriya wouldn't be much of a problem. Taka already knew the paths through which he improved in the series. All it would take was to drop a hint or two in brief conversations, and the greenhead would figure out the rest himself, speedrunning his progress in the show. He didn't need to get friendly or anything. But everyone else. He hadn't had many interactions with the others, so he couldn't just go up to them and say, "I'm gonna make you strong, and you're gonna like it." Well, he could. He just wasn't sure that'd end well. Maybe I could crush them so thoroughly in a future exercise that they'd inevitably want to learn from me. He mused, wondering if there were combat exercises like yesterday's that the show had skipped over as filler, and that he could use to give the students some proper motivation. Unfortunately, he didn't get to pursue that scary line of thought for long. Slam, because just then, the classroom door opened, and you know who walked in. "To your seats, now," Aizawa commanded as he stepped into the classroom. Everyone was already seated, though, so he was only met with silence. Still, he didn't seem fazed in the slightest, simply walking to the podium and dropping his things onto it before straightening up. Once settled, his tired gaze swept across the class. "I reviewed all of yesterday's combat exercise footage," he said flatly. The air immediately grew tense. Several students stiffened, already dreading what their strict homeroom teacher was about to say. Rumor had spread that Yaoyorozu had confirmed that the current second years had indeed been expelled back in the day by Aizawa. Meaning the so-called rational deception of the first day hadn't been a deception at all. They had been pretty close to having someone expelled. Everyone shuddered as Aizawa's gaze swept through the classroom, seemingly searching for someone. Was someone about to be expelled? That was the collective thought. But then, to their surprise, Aizawa's eyes stopped on Taka. "Takahashi, you better start taking this seriously. Consideration is fine, but you're here to become a hero. You'd better start giving your all from now on." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Plus ultra. Remember that." A collective sweat drop followed, so it was just advice. Still, as most processed his words, several students glanced at Taka with silent pleas for him not to take that advice to heart. The last thing they wanted was to face a serious Taka after witnessing what he'd done yesterday without even trying. Taka, however, only gave a half-hearted nod, his expression unreadable. That somehow made it worse. Had he actually listened, or not? Ignoring the class's unease entirely, Aizawa shifted his gaze to Todoroki. "Todoroki, pull yourself together next time. You can't afford to let your emotions control you in combat." "Yes," Todoroki replied quietly, his usual stoic expression intact, though something somber lingered beneath it. Aizawa moved on. "Bakugo. The same goes for you. You're not a child anymore, stop throwing tantrums. TCH. With that, Aizawa addressed the class as a whole. As for the rest of you, you certainly weren't perfect, but you're still learning. Don't get discouraged, you'll have plenty of chances to get the knowledge smashed into your brains. No one liked the way he phrased that, but no one dared comment on it either. Satisfied with their silence, Aizawa glanced down at a paper on the podium, then looked back up with a bored expression. Anyway, with that out of the way, his eyes sharpened slightly. Let's move on to today's main activity. The class collectively tensed, except for Taka. So far, it had only been intense activity after intense activity since they got to UA. They couldn't help but feel nervous about what was to come now. Fortunately, you'll be deciding your class representatives, Aizawa declared. In the instant he did, me, choose me. I want to be class rep, pick me. Me too, I'll do it, I'll be the leader, let me do it, me. Pandemonium erupted, hands shot up like rockets all around the classroom, voices overlapping into a single wall of noise as enthusiasm ran rampant. Every single student raised their hand. Every single student, save for one quiet, black-haired teenager seated by the window. Right, now I remember, Taka thought, massaging his forehead as future events clicked back into place. The class representative thing, and then the whole press panic mess. In the show, it had been Iida's quick thinking during the student stampede, caused by reporters trespassing onto school grounds, that earned him the class's respect. Despite not being the initial favorite, he'd ended up as class representative. And that was it. Everything else that day had been relatively calm. Too calm, because the press invasion, something that shouldn't have happened given UA's level of security, had been nothing more than a prelude to the USJ incident. Which means, Shigaraki is somewhere out there right now. Taka's eyes narrowed as he glanced through the window, toward the streets beyond the school grounds. The source of most of the future chaos was out there. Somewhere. If he went now and beat the crap out of him, there was a chance he could prevent everything. Or, he'd just invite Potato Head to personally knock on his door. Either way, I won't be doing it, Taka decided, pulling his gaze away from the window. Why? Because Shigaraki had a purpose to fulfill. One greater than whatever All for One had planned for him. A very important purpose. To help Miura Farm, Taka thought, a faint smirk tugging at the edge of his poker face. Then it's decided. We will choose the representative via voting. Iida's sudden announcement snapped Taka out of his thoughts. By the time he looked back, Iida was already at the board, writing names as the rest of the class watched with anticipation. Focus, Taka, focus, he reminded himself, eyes narrowing slightly. Shigaraki's future ASS whoopings are a problem for another day. Today, worry about today. And first of all, Taka's eyes sharpened as his name appeared on the board. Without his consent, that raised an important question. Did he even want to be class representative? Being in a position of authority was Oritic, sure. But class rep, no matter how hard he searched his memories, the role mostly boiled down to organizing things, keeping classmates orderly, and dealing with paperwork. Not exactly prime or a farming material. On top of that, with all the studying and training he already had his clones doing, adding more responsibilities meant all of that boredom, exhaustion, and stress would come flooding back into his head once they dispersed. Yeah, hell no, Taka snorted quietly, closing his eyes and shaking his head wryly. Still, it wasn't like he had to worry. He'd barely talked to most of the class. Even if he was undeniably cool, no one was going to vote for someone they hardly knew. Especially not when everyone was just gonna vote for themselves, save for a few. With his worries gone, he stared at the multiple names written across the board, jaw shifting while deep in thought. Maybe I'll vote for Yaoyorozu. She was elected in the original as vice representative, so one more vote for her won't matter much. Minutes later, the votes were tallied. Iida stared at the results written on the board, his expression sullen. 0 votes. His name stood alone, completely untouched, not even by his own vote, having given it to someone else. On the other hand, Takahashi Fukumoto, 6, Momo Yaoyorozu, 3, Izuku Midoriya, 2, a total defeat. Taka stared at the board, deadpan. Slowly, rustily, his head turned as he scanned the classroom. Immediately, he spotted Sato and Kirishima flashing him enthusiastic thumbs-ups. His eyebrow twitched, he continued scanning, and the first thing that caught his eye was right next to him. Tokiyami met his gaze for a brief second, gave him a curt nod, then averted his eyes and stared straight ahead, stiff as ever. You can't be serious, Taka felt a curse rise to his lips. Then his eyes shifted forward. Toru was waving at him from the front of the row, her sleeve fluttering cheerfully. He kept looking, but couldn't immediately identify the rest of the bastards who had dared vote for him. Still, one thing was absolutely certain. Congratulations, Taka thought, eyes narrowing vindictively. You just became the first ones I'll be personally training. Ahead of him, a certain green-haired boy shuddered for no apparent reason. And behind him, a certain rich girl felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine. Comma. Press attack. Press attack. Comma. Then, the class representative will be Takahashi, while the vice representative will be Yaoyorozu, Aizawa announced lazily from inside his sleeping bag. The two students stood at the front of the classroom, accepting the nomination with outward grace and dignity. I'm going to make you all suffer unimaginably, Taka thought as he glared at the culprits behind his newly acquired responsibility. Kirishima and Sato cheered enthusiastically from their seats. The rest of the class seemed content with the result. As for the others who had voted for him, those he still hadn't identified yet, they could hide for now. That wouldn't stop him from finding them eventually. Let's do our best, Takahashi-san. Yaoyorozu's bright, enthusiastic voice snapped him out of his thoughts. He turned toward her, sweat dropping internally. She looks way too excited about the mountain of work waiting for us. Deadpanning, he gave her a small nod. Sure. With that, he faced forward again and let out a quiet sigh. What was done was done. Even if he hadn't wanted this, there was no denying reality. He was the class representative now, and he couldn't exactly call himself an Aura farmer if he got cold feet at this point. Very well, let's do this shit, he thought, eyes narrowing as his resolve hardened. Here, Aizawa's voice snapped him out of his thoughts. Taka turned, and froze. A thick stack of papers was being held out to him. Quote. This is, he eyed them as if they carried some kind of contagious disease. Aizawa smirked faintly. Paperwork, registering your positions, basic information, and, after lunch, during our next period, you and Yaoyorozu will be selecting additional class officers. Make sure to file that too once you're done. He continued casually. Some of those forms also require your classmates' parents' signatures. They're related to future training exercises, quirk usage permissions, and various legal matters. Taka took the stack without a word, his expression unchanging, and nodded. Yaoyorozu stepped closer, curiosity written on her face. Taka split the papers and handed part of them to her so she could look them over. As she did, Taka stared down at his own share and pondered the future. Should I just reveal that I can make clones right here and now? Comma. Degree. Lunch period. Comma. After waiting in line and choosing from the many dishes Lunch Rush had prepared, the spiciest, Taka scanned the cafeteria for a place to sit. Not long after, he found one, or rather, it found him. Not too far away, Kirishima was waving him over with a friendly grin. Sighing and shelving his vengeful plans for later, Taka walked toward the table. Kaminari, Mina, Sato, and Jiro were already seated there. So much for a quiet lunch to calm down my stress, he thought as he sat down. Well, if it isn't our new class representative, Mina exclaimed as Taka joined the group, slamming her palms onto the table inquisitively. So, how is it, feeling the power going to your head already? The only thing going to my head is a headache, Taka groaned internally, but merely nodded without answering. You don't look very pleased, Jiro commented, studying him curiously. Did you vote for me? Taka asked, eyes narrowing as they locked onto her. She stiffened. I figured you were going to get elected anyway, so I voted for myself. I did, me too. Sato and Kirishima both raised their thumbs proudly. I figured as much, Taka muttered, fingers tapping impatiently against the table. Not me, I wanted to be class representative. Mina stuck out her tongue, then immediately grinned. Still, I think you're gonna do a great job. You've got that broody, serious vibe. It kinda fits. Yeah, I thought so too, Kirishima added, pumping a fist. Sato nodded along, arms crossed and eyes closed in agreement. You helped me improve during the combat exercise, so I figured someone like you wouldn't be bad at the job. So these are the consequences of my actions, once again, Taka thought as he stabbed a bite of food and ate it without enthusiasm. I voted for myself too, Kaminari admitted shamelessly before flashing Taka a thumbs up. But honestly, I think you'll do great, man. You all really think so? Taka asked, his gaze sweeping around the table. They nodded in unison. Taka smiled gently. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, he pulled out a thick stack of papers and began distributing them. All right, Fill these out with your personal information, sign a few of these forms, read the rest carefully, and I want everything completed and returned by the end of the day," he said calmly. "If not, I'll be informing Aizawa-sensei of your impunctuality and making sure you're properly reprimanded." Quote, quote. The table fell silent as everyone stared at him. "What, you don't like it?" Taka asked flatly, shooting them a sharp glare. "You're the ones who chose me. So why are you looking at me like that?" Immediately, everyone averted their eyes. "Why does it feel like he's angry?" Kaminari whispered to Jiro. "Why should I know?" she shot back. "Did we do something wrong?" Kirishima added nervously. "Maybe it was the broody and serious comment," Mina asked, a bead of sweat rolling down her forehead. Taka simply watched them with narrowed eyes while going back to eat. "You wanted me to be class representative. Fine, I'll be the most class representative to ever class reap. Even Iida will fear my name." As Taka steeled his resolve, Sato tucked the papers into his bag with a firm nod. He then stared at his half-eaten food, brows knit in thought. "Hey, Takahashi," he finally spoke, cutting through the lingering tension as he looked up with a serious expression. "There's something I wanted to talk to you about." "What is it?" Taka lifted his gaze from his meal, raising an eyebrow. "I know it's kind of weird, asking this from someone I've only known for a few days, but..." A brief silence followed, then Sato straightened, eyes burning with determination. "Could you help me train?" The table went dead silent again. Everyone's eyes darted between Sato and Taka in disbelief. "Intel, sure," Taka replied calmly, not a hint of surprise on his face. "What is this sudden development?" Mina yelled, standing up and slamming her hands onto the table. Kirishima turned to Sato, completely baffled. "Dude, are you serious? Why so suddenly? I mean, yeah, you said he helped you during the combat exercise, but so much you're even asking for training now." Sato shook his head, fists clenching tightly. "You don't get it. When we fought, I felt it. Takahashi, his fighting skills are incredible, even without using his quirk." His gaze locked onto Taka. "It might not have looked like much to you guys watching from the monitoring room, but I felt it firsthand. After that fight, it was like I'd taken a step forward in my combat ability." He took a breath, and seeing how serious Aizawa-sensei is, how he's even willing to expel us if we don't meet his standards, I want to be ready for anything. Takahashi's the only one I know who can help me with that. "For real," Kaminari muttered, stunned by how intense things had suddenly become. Silence fell once again as everyone processed Sato's words. "At least, until then, could I join too?" Kirishima chimed in, the fire of manliness lighting up in his eyes. "I don't really get it, but if you trust Taka that much, then I wanna see what the fuzz is all about." What's this?" Mina perked up, excitement rising. It suddenly turned into some kind of training session. "Can I join too? It sounds fun." Taka nodded simply, not looking particularly bothered by the extra people joining in. "What's with these guys?" Kaminari muttered, no longer sounding nearly as enthusiastic. Jiro shared his confusion, glancing between the suddenly energized group with an odd expression. It was only their third day of school. Granted, it was the hero course, but still, weren't they being a bit too intense already? To their dismay, Mina suddenly turned toward them with a bright, inviting smile. "What about you two? Wanna join us?" Both of them visibly hesitated. On one hand, they didn't share the excitement buzzing around the table. On the other hand, outright refusing for no real reason felt awkward. So, after a moment, Jiro sighed. "Maybe, just to watch for a bit. I'm not good with physical training like that." Kaminari turned to her, baffled. But finding no solid reason to back out either, he sighed as well, scratching the back of his head helplessly. "Then, I guess I'll go too." And just like that, an after-school training session had been decided out of thin air. As for Taka, his internal smirk stretched as wide as it could possibly go. "Didn't even have to suggest it myself. Does the universe love me or something?" His plans were already moving forward before he'd even taken the first real step. How could he not be pleased? Now all that remained was figuring out how to help this bunch step up their game, and he'd be set. However, while Taka calmly mapped things out in his head, Mina turned toward him. "So, class representative, where should we meet?" That snapped Taka out of his thoughts, realizing he hadn't actually planned that far ahead. Fortunately, someone else had. "We could use the same gym where we did some of the quirk assessment tests on the first day," Sato suggested. "We'd need permission first, though. Taka nodded, unfazed. Sato had very obviously voiced exactly what he had been thinking. I see, well then, we'll leave that to you, class representative. Mina said cheerfully, passing the responsibility off without hesitation. Taka opened his mouth to respond, but before he could. Re-eng, a piercing alarm echoed throughout the cafeteria, instantly drawing everyone's attention. Attention, a level 3 security breach has been detected. All students, please evacuate outdoors immediately. What's going on? Kirishima jumped to his feet, panic flashing across his face. The others followed suit, standing up and glancing around at the increasingly restless crowd. Only Taka remained seated, calmly finishing his meal, his eyes quietly scanning the rising chaos with complete composure. Jiro snapped her head toward him. Oi, Takahashi, what the hell are you doing? We've gotta. Before she could finish, Taka raised a hand to calm her down and stood. His expression was so utterly calm, so unshaken, that the panic welling up inside her faltered. And as the others turned to look at him, that same strange calm spread to them as well. Their racing hearts began to slow. Regardless of what the alarm actually meant, with Takahashi here, none of them felt like it could truly be that bad. Such was the presence of the genuinely strong. As the group gradually calmed, Taka lightly tapped his tray once, then looked at them evenly. Make sure no one steals my food. I'll go deal with that. His tone left no room for argument. Turning away, he walked calmly toward the cafeteria exit, where clusters of panicked students were already beginning to pile up. Within moments, chaos had already bloomed. Students pushed against one another, voices rising in distress as bodies were squeezed together, all of them trying to force their way into the hallways leading outside. Taka stopped just behind the writhing mass and snorted softly at the sight. Wouldn't want anyone to be trampled to death, so, let's do this quick. Not willing to let this drag on any longer, his aura expanded. Invisible, but absolute, it washed over the crowd in a single, overwhelming wave. Then, he took a step forward and called out. Step. Hey. The effect was immediate. Just like with the press earlier that day, dread rippled through the crowd the instant he spoke. An instinctive certainty spread among them. If they didn't turn around and acknowledge the speaker, they would be making an unforgivable mistake. So they did. The pushing stopped. The noise died down. Every single student turned. Confusion flickered through their faces when all they found was a teenager standing there, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed, expression cool and detached. Some of them were upperclassmen. Third years, even. And yet, no one questioned him, no one scoffed, no one spoke, and no one dared to disregard him. The moment their eyes settled on him, there was no doubt he had been the one who spoke, his presence repressing any kind of diminishing thought from their minds. So, they waited for him to speak. Like kids before a greater authority. Quote. Seeing he had gathered their attention, Taka slowly removed one hand from his pocket and casually hooked his thumb to his side, pointing toward the hallway windows next to them. Only then did he speak again. It's the press, he said flatly. Behave yourselves. Heads turned as one, and there, just beyond the glass, the distant mass of reporters finally came into view. The panic that had been brewing vanished almost instantly. Relief spread through the crowd as understanding set in, and their gazes naturally returned to the teenager who had resolved everything so effortlessly. Only, he was already gone. Just as mysteriously and imposingly as he had appeared, he was gone. Like a ghost. Of course, in reality, he was just back at the table, calmly taking his seat and resuming his meal as if nothing had happened. He ignored the stunned stares burning into him from his classmates around him, focused solely on finishing his food. It wasn't until he set his utensils down that he finally looked up. Seeing the disbelief plastered across their faces, he cleaned himself and raised an eyebrow slightly. What? To be continued. The plans are developing, and, of course, Taka aura farms once more using his future knowledge. I'm not gonna put how much aura he gains every time, since it's a bit annoying. But since the number of people was kinda big this time, let's say he earned some good 400 aura in one go. Pretty good for a day where not much happens. Of course, the day ain't finished yet. There's still the training session to attend. But I'm gonna make it just one chapter long to not stay on it too much. Anyway, see you guys next chapter. 25 comments 0 vote. Training session. Join my Patreon to get access to more chapters, and you'll help me make ends meet while doing so. Patreon.com/thesynonym. Training session. Nezu's office. Taka stood before Nezu, his expression impassive as the large rat tilted his head, amusement gleaming in his eyes. So, you wish to occupy one of the gyms for a while for a training session with your classmates? Yeah, Taka answered without batting an eye. Nezu nodded thoughtfully. Well, that shouldn't be a problem. There should be no classes today using it. Thanks. And so, having obtained what he came for, Taka turned to leave. Or at least, that's how he wished it would end. But as expected, a meeting with the omnipresent rat was never that simple. It's been a while since we've seen each other. Well, you saw me a month ago on your acceptance letter, but for me, it's been quite some time, Nezu said from behind him, forcing Taka to halt mid-step. I suppose, Taka muttered, not quite sure how he was supposed to respond to that. How has school been so far? You ended up in Aizawa-kun's class, didn't you? That must be rather troublesome. Taka neither denied nor agreed. Aside from Aizawa's clear dislike of him holding back, there hadn't really been many issues. It's all right, I guess. He shrugged. Ha ha ha, all right, you say. That's the first time someone's spoken so calmly about his classes. Nezu chuckled. Though, considering the level you're at, I suppose it's hard for Aizawa-kun's usual strictness to feel all that concerning. Taka nodded absently, a faintly lost look crossing his face. Where is this even going? Still, Nezu continued, if he ever goes too far, don't hesitate to tell me. I can't allow the best prospect of this year to be expelled over something trivial, can I? Now that was weird. Why did this suddenly feel like a mafia meeting, with Nezu offering to take care of his problems? No need, Taka said, shaking his head faintly. I'll be fine on my own. Is that so? Nezu smiled, whatever thoughts running through his mind remaining known only to him. A brief silence followed. Taka wasn't sure if he was free to go, while Nezu seemed content to let his thoughts speak before his mouth did. Eventually, Nezu broke the quiet. I reviewed some of your hero class matches from yesterday. Your prowess seems higher. How much has that energy you hold grown since we last met? Taka paused, eyes unfocusing slightly as if running calculations. It's about twice as big. Of course, it was closer to 4 times, but Nezu didn't need to know that just yet. Gotta save the surprise factor for the perfect moment. A 2-fold increase in just over 3 months, Nezu scratched beneath his muzzle thoughtfully. And considering it's been over 12 months since your quirk awakened, I suppose that energy of yours grows exponentially. Ah, yes, Taka's sweat dropped. He hadn't expected Nezu to infer that much from a single statement. He nodded carefully, worried even that small motion might risk giving something else away. What about other abilities? Nezu pressed on. Have you developed any new ones? Taka considered the question. This much, I can show. Taka nodded inwardly, his previous wariness fading slightly. He knew Nezu would likely help smooth the process of officially registering future quirk evolutions, and now that UA was starting, there was no better time to start unlocking some of those abilities for future use. And perhaps, if he revealed a bit here, Nezu might help with something else he had in mind. There are a couple, so, he began with the demonstration. First, he tore a sheet of paper from one of his notebooks. Then he picked up a pencil, one that had accompanied him since his days as a vigilante, and had tasted blood once in the past, and tightened his grip. His usual red aura began to bubble around him, like still, tranquil water. Then a frown crossed Taka's face. The aura flared. The room shuddered faintly under the sudden pressure, though Nezu remained calm, observing from his seat without so much as blinking. Abruptly, the aura began to condense around the pencil, sharpening and compressing, until it formed a blade of light along its length, longer than the pencil itself, and far deadlier. With the preparations ready, Taka tossed the paper into the air. And slashed. Swish. In the next instant, the paper split cleanly in 2, drifting helplessly to the floor. As it did, the aura receded. Nezu stroked his snout, curiosity clear in his gaze. But Taka wasn't finished. This time, he released the pencil, letting it float several meters away within the office. Then, he raised a palm. The moment he did, his aura surged forward from his hand, stopping a few centimeters ahead. And solidified, a literal wall of hardened aura formed in midair. The pencil, which had been floating motionless, suddenly snapped into alignment with Taka. Then it shot forward like a bullet. Clang! All of its momentum died the instant it struck the barrier. The wall didn't even ripple. Taka huffed softly as he ended the demonstration, pulling the pencil back to him and slipping it into his backpack in one smooth motion. That energy of yours is truly a mystery, Nezu said, his tone openly entertained. Both abilities appear to stem from a solidification function, coupled with your laser beams, which imply conversion into light and heat, and then with its main function as telekinesis, there truly doesn't seem to be an end to its versatility. Its potential truly appears limitless. I find myself quite curious to see how you'll develop over the next 3 years, Takahashi-kun. Taka shrugged. Nezu chuckled at the reaction, then waved him off. Well, I merely wanted to check in on you. You're free to go now, if you wish. Your friends are likely waiting. Actually, Taka said calmly, stopping before turning away. There was something I wanted to ask of you. Degree. Minutes later, Taka walked out of the building calmly, his poker face carrying a faint trace of contentment. Success. The smug thought lingered as he adjusted his bag. I'll have to deliver the official petition to the support course later, but it should be done within a week at most. He didn't know exactly when the USJ incident would happen, but judging by canon, it wouldn't be far off. So, if luck was on his side, what he had asked the support course for would be ready before then. And if not, whatever, he could always improvise. Snorting softly at the thought, he shifted his attention inward, reviewing the 2 abilities he had just demonstrated to Nezu, skills that would likely become part of his official arsenal in the near future. Aura projection. Even a stick is enough. Mode active. Description. What makes a swordsman? His sword, his skill. The question can be reduced to something far more basic. Does the sword define the man, or does the man define the sword? In most cases, a blade grants the ability to cut. But for the truly exceptional, it is not the sword that gives power, it is the man who lends the sword its edge. For one who truly commands the blade, even a simple stick may cut the heavens. Filled right pointing small triangle converts aura into a coating that grants a cutting property to objects. Filled right pointing small triangle. The more aura condensed, the sharper the resulting edge. Filled right pointing small triangle. The bigger the object, the more aura it consumes. Filled right pointing small triangle. Leaner and longer objects provide a more efficient expenditure in aura. Filled right pointing small triangle. It is highly recommended that the host learn swordsmanship, lest he accidentally bisect his own allies. Aura projection. Hardening. Mode active. Description. The aura of the truly cool is malleable like clay, yet hard as steel. Let imagination shape your aura, and let that imagination impose itself upon the world. But please, unlike many solid energy manifestas, if you form a barrier, do not lose consciousness when it breaks. That is extremely unauric. Filled right pointing small triangle allows the shaping and solidification of aura into arbitrary forms. Filled right pointing small triangle. The more aura poured in, the sturdier the construct becomes. Filled right pointing small triangle. The more aura poured in, the more complex constructs you can make. Filled right pointing small triangle. The more aura poured in, the bigger the constructs. Just as Nezu had said, both abilities stemmed from the same core concept, solidifying what was once an ethereal and intangible energy. After recalling several characters capable of reinforcing weapons to cut through materials normally deemed uncuttable, Taka had begun experimenting with forming an aura blade around pointed objects. It hadn't come naturally as telekinesis did, but it also hadn't been that difficult. After a few failures and adjustments, he unlocked the skill without much trouble. He could now act like a mystical swordsman, splitting mountains with a stick. Albeit at the cost of losing a chunk of his usable aura until he changed tactics. From there, the leap in thought for the next skill was obvious. If he could form a blade, why not other solid constructs? That line of thought led to the second skill. This one had been trickier. Solidifying energy itself was a far more abstract concept. Still, with persistence, he eventually grasped it. His healing skill did use a similar concept, after all, only turning his aura into actual matter instead of just solidifying it. Still, this would be quite good for aura farming in the coming events. Provided the support course finished his request before USJ. Even if they didn't, he could still make use of these abilities later, so it wasn't a real loss. I wonder how that'll turn out, Taka thought, excitement slowly building at the prospect of the literal day his school got hit by a terrorist attack. But hey, that's just how it goes. Everything for the aura. Class rep, how'd it go? Mina's voice snapped Taka out of his thoughts as he stepped into UA's backyard, the same field where they'd done their quirk assessment days ago. Not too far, his classmates waited for him, with Mina waving at him. As he approached, he gave the group a simple, curt nod. Good. Sato let out a relieved sigh. For a moment, I thought they weren't gonna lend it to us. We're first years, and it's only our third day. As expected from our class representative. Kirishima bellowed, pumping a fist. He pulled it off anyway. It wasn't even that hard, Taka deadpanned inwardly, but outwardly, he merely nodded again. Well then, what are we waiting for? Let's go. Mina bounced on her heels, already fired up. Not long after, the 6 of them made their way to the gym, unlocking it with the keys Nezu had handed Taka. The place was spacious and impeccably maintained, exactly what one would expect from an elite school like UA. Still, at its core, it was just a gym. Nothing extravagant. Once everyone had changed into their gym uniforms and settled in, they gathered in a loose circle at the center. So, Jiro glanced around, arms crossed. What now? Takahashi, let's spar, Sato said immediately, slamming a fist into his palm, eyes already blazing. It would have to be a spar without quirks, as we don't want to damage the gym. Taka clarified. Sato nodded, looking very eager. But then the rest of us would just be watching, Mina complained, pouting slightly. Kirishima scratched his cheek, conflicted. I don't mind, but yeah, it kinda feels like a waste of the time they gave us. Doesn't sound that bad to me, Kaminari shrugged. Jiro nodded along with him. They preferred to be spectators. Taka seemed to think for a moment. Then, how about 5 against 1? Quote, question mark, exclamation mark, quote. All 5 of them stared at him. So full of himself, even if no one said it out loud, the thought was written all over their faces. Still, despite the arrogance, that didn't take away the fact that even with such a hindrance, the match was still leaning in Taka's favor. That's totally unfair, Mina protested, raising a hand. Sato and Kirishima might manage, but the rest of us aren't very good close combat fighters. We'd just get steamrolled. Taka, however, remained unfazed. My quirk lets me convert my physical strength into telekinesis, he explained calmly. That means I can convert most of it into telekinesis and leave a normal level of strength in my body. That way, that'd leave you all an equal chance. So arrogant, Mina shot back as she pointed at him accusatorily, though there was more amusement than offense in her tone. How normal are we talking about here? Kaminari asked, interest creeping into his voice. No superhuman strength, Taka replied flatly. Just as strong as I look. Taka was fairly lean, if that meant anything. When he wasn't flexing, at least. That did it, everyone's eyes lit up. Then, Sato muttered, clenching his fists, you'd be beatable. I don't like it, Kirishima said firmly. It's manlier to fight you at your strongest. First, Taka replied evenly, you should prove you can fight me at my weakest. Kirishima froze. Then his teeth flashed in a grin, competitive fire igniting in his eyes. Don't underestimate me. Fine. No takebacksies. That'd be totally unmanly. Sure. Taka nodded. He walked away from the group, stopping on the opposite side of the gym, hands on his pockets in calm, and eyes closing as he waited patiently. Sato, Kirishima, and Mina began stretching immediately, eagerness clear on their faces. Kaminari and Jiro exchanged glances, still hesitant, but undeniably intrigued. Seeing that, Taka spoke up to them, opening one eye. Try to last a bit. Ha, those words were enough to make any hesitation they had left evaporate. Soon enough, the remaining 2 joined in on the stretching. Meanwhile, Taka went back to closing both eyes, his posture calm and composed. At least, externally, I might be pushing it here, he admitted inwardly, sweat dropping. I'm confident in my fighting skills, but 5 against 1 might be a bit much, this ain't a movie, after all. Then again, maybe not. Ever since acquiring the Let's Dance skill, his battle IQ should have improved. But aside from Seiji, he hadn't had many chances to properly test it. The same applied to his fight dance skills. He practiced with his clones from time to time, and sparred with Seiji as well, but Seiji was a professional. That made it hard to tell how much he'd actually improved against less experienced opponents. And his clones, well, it was weird to spar against himself. Now, though, that opportunity had finally appeared. Albeit in a rather annoying format. Keeping track of 5 people at once was going to be a pain. But if I can't handle this, he reasoned, can I really call myself an Aura farmer? Either he lost aura today, or he upheld his title. Opening his eyes, Taka saw the group finishing their stretches. He took his hands out of the pockets. And took his stance. Status page. Filled right pointing small triangle strength. 2000 right pointing arrow 167. Filled right pointing small triangle defense. 3595 right pointing arrow 334. Filled right pointing small triangle aura projection. 35,632. Total aura. 36,032 right pointing arrow 35,632, 98.92%. First clone's aura. 100, 0.27%. Second clone's aura. 100, 0.27%. Comma. With preparations complete, he beckoned them forward. There was no need for a referee, nor a countdown. Let's begin. The battle started just like that. While some hesitated, unsure about rushing their classmate all at once, others didn't bother with restraint. Rog. Kirishima moved first. The redhead lunged forward and threw a punch, one clean and practiced. It looked like Kirishima had some basics in boxing. But he clearly lacked before Seiji. Even with his stats heavily suppressed, Taka had no trouble following the motion. He tilted his head slightly, rolling his shoulder just enough to redirect the punch so it grazed past him. Using the momentum of that deflection, he stepped in and snapped an upward elbow strike into Kirishima's shin. One meant to shake him, rather than truly hurt him. Whoa, Kirishima stumbled, forced several steps back as his balance broke. Before he could fully recover, Sato charged in. Even without his quirk, the guy was built like a tank. More importantly, without Sugar Rush clouding his mind, he was actually thinking. Sato threw a solid combination, mixing punches while avoiding the obvious counters. For a moment, he held his ground. Oof. Then a heavy kick slammed into his chest, pushing him backward. Again, controlled, enough force to move him, but not hurt him. What did I say about only using punches? Taka remarked calmly. Sato frowned as he steadied himself, clearly annoyed at having that pointed out mid-fight, but knowing he was right. Next came Mina. Unlike the others, she didn't rely purely on strength. She was light on her feet, fast, agile, surprisingly technical. She lacked Sato's raw power, but she made up for it with movement and pressure. Why won't you stay still? She complained, throwing out rapid strikes as she darted around him. Unfortunately for her, Taka had dealt with worse. Even as she dipped under his guard and circled to disorient him, Taka evaded each attack with minimal motion, small shifts, subtle pivots. Compared to that damn monkey, who never stopped moving, this was practically tutorial level. Still, something about her style felt familiar. It's like a basic version of me using dance movements in combat. Taka mused as he dove under yet another blow, noticing a certain grace in her movements. Which meant he also knew its weaknesses. After all, he'd sparred with his clones enough times to recognize them. And one of them was, fast movement could just as easily disorient the user if the opponent used it to add onto his speed. Take this, huh? As Mina dove in again, Taka's footwork sharpened. In the blink of an eye, he was gone. At least, that's what it felt like. A split second later, Mina felt her foot snag mid-step. Yuwa, she stumbled as Taka's foot locked briefly against hers, throwing her balance off. Still, she recovered quickly, hopping back and putting distance between them. She laughed nervously, eyes fixed on Taka as he stood there calmly, utterly composed. With Mina reassessing her approach, that left only two to attack. Jiro and Kaminari. Both were still hanging back. Never mind, can we call this off? Kaminari muttered, watching how easily the others had been handled. Jiro, however, inhaled deeply. Then, she dashed forward. And like the others before her, Jiro did her best to land a hit on Taka. Her movements were noticeably rougher. Clearly, she hadn't focused much on hand-to-hand combat compared to the rest. It faintly reminded him of his early days training with Seiji. I've come a long way since then, huh? Snorting quietly at the thought, Taka sidestepped another attack, then subtly redirected her momentum, pushing her forward just enough to nearly make her stumble. She managed to keep her footing, but, like the others, ended up halting once she realized she couldn't land a single hit. That left only Kaminari. All eyes turned to him. He looked nervous. I guess it's my turn to get kicked now, huh? He muttered. Still, comforted by the fact that everyone else had already been handled without much trouble, he dashed forward. Just like Jiro, Kaminari lacked real hand-to-hand skill. After a brief exchange, he was sent rolling across the floor before scrambling back up, swaying slightly. "What's with this guy?" Kaminari complained, rubbing his side. "Is he really not using his superhuman strength?" The others looked just as frustrated. Taka, on the other hand, remained composed beyond measure. At least, that's what they thought. Soon, they noticed the faint frown creasing his face. "I thought I said this was a 5 against 1, Taka said calmly. "So why are you attacking like it's a movie, one at a time?" The 5 hesitated. Ganging up on someone didn't feel very heroic. Their doubts vanished when Taka beckoned them forward with one hand. "Come on, you're heroes. One day, you'll have to fight in groups," he said evenly. "Better learn now, where I won't hurt you too much." That settled it. The 5 launched at him together. Degree. 30 minutes later. I might have bitten off more than I can chew. Taka's eyes flicked rapidly from one opponent to the next, constantly assessing incoming threats. At first, handling all 5 hadn't been much of a problem. Their coordination was terrible, and while some had decent technique, it wasn't enough to overwhelm him. But as the minutes passed, something changed. Their affinity began to rise. The bunch were learning to actually work as a team. Gone was the easy rhythm where he could repel them one by one. Now, Taka was dodging for his life as 5 determined hero students came at him with growing coordination. I may have gotten them too fired up, Taka thought as he dove and slipped through a flurry of attacks, his body swaying rapidly away from Mina's swift barrage. Kaminari and Jiro flanked him from either side, one throwing a punch, the other snapping out a kick. With a sharp twist of his torso, Taka narrowly escaped both and skidded backward. Only for Sato to appear behind him, swinging a heavy arm down. Taka ducked under it at the last second, sliding past the overly burly student. Then Kirishima charged in, ferocious and fast, lunging straight for a tackle. This time, without his aura-enhanced movement, Taka couldn't escape. The redhead wrapped him up and slammed him to the floor. But at that very moment, something snapped inside him. "I'm not gonna lose aura." The aura farmer within him roared to life as he teetered on the edge of aura loss. His thoughts accelerated. In an instant, he forced the fall into a roll across the gym floor, using the momentum to kick Kirishima away once he gained the upper position. The impact gave him just enough space. Taka sprang backward in a long, powerful jump, barely landing before the others were already rushing him again. However, time to kick it up a notch. Taking a deep breath, Taka stepped forward and charged at them. The sudden shift in pace startled the group, but already coordinated, they didn't think it would matter. They had the numbers, and now they were overwhelming him. Or so they thought. Just as the two sides were about to collide, Taka dropped flat and slid beneath them. Now out of their eyesight, his legs snapped into motion. Swift, precisely, and, of course, stylishly, they entangled on theirs in a fluid maneuver. Then he swept, all at once. Wah. It caught them completely off guard. Most crashed to the floor before they could even react. Mina, however, managed to recover, planting one hand and springing away, eyes shining. "Whoa, what the heck was that?" Taka ignored her. "Yeah, this is what I'm talking about." As he pushed himself up into a stylish sky kick and landed cleanly on his feet, he felt it. "Let's dance." Activated. His passive skill kicked in. Instantly, his reflexes sharpened. The world seemed to slow down, yet somehow remained just as fast. It was a strange sensation, one that nearly made him smirk. It felt like his brain had been kicked into a higher gear. And it showed the moment the 5 regained their footing and charged again. Taka didn't blink, he surged forward to meet them, and under the storm of incoming attacks, his body flowed effortlessly, dodging with full body movement as kicks lashed out in rapid succession, his breakdancing skills fully unleashed. Before they even realized what had happened, each of them was sent flying, struck somewhere, shoved aside, or knocked off balance. Moments later, Taka spun up from the ground and landed on his feet, barely winded. "You can't be serious," Jiro panted, bracing her hands on her knees once she stood back up. "What's with this guy?" Kaminari stared at Taka, eyes wide with frustration. "Just when I thought he was looking invincible." Sato nodded, equally exhausted and annoyed. Kirishima, meanwhile, was crying. Whether from emotion or frustration, that was only known to him. What the hell? Mina, on the other hand, looked thrilled. Her grin widened as she bounced in her spot. That was sick. What were those moves? Hey, class rep. They almost looked like breakdancing. Don't tell me you know how to dance. Taka winced inwardly. His desperation not to lose Aura had made him get carried away, and show more than he should have. It was just his breakdancing skills, so it wasn't that big of a deal, but the fewer connections he had to Rocknesses for now, the better. That was why he had fought normally up until this point. Sadly, he'd just added another one. Ahem, I know a bit, Taka said calmly, trying to downplay it as much as possible, hoping they wouldn't make a fuss over it. He had miscalculated. That didn't look like a bit. Mina shot back immediately. You were outright fusing breakdancing with martial arts. It was crazy, I could barely follow your movements. Taka's sweat dropped at the sheer enthusiasm the pink-haired girl had for dance. Was she a fan of that in the show? He mused, wincing as he tried to remember. His mind jumped ahead to the school festival, the only arc where hobbies like that should have had a place. And indeed, right, Mina was the one in charge of directing the dance team. Taka groaned inwardly. He would have slapped himself on the spot if doing so wouldn't cost him Aura. I really need to start writing a notebook with all this useful info before I screw up again. You gotta show me that sometime, class rep. Mina beamed, already fired up and ready to go another round. Seeing her enthusiasm, the other four subconsciously prepared themselves as well. Crap, Taka winced, not quite feeling like fighting anymore. Fortunately, ring. The alarm on Taka's phone cut through the tension, snapping everyone out of it. In his mindscape, Taka let out a long, relieved sigh. He silenced the alarm, then turned the phone around to show them the time. Sadly, we need to get going. Our time in the gym is over. No way, yes way, arg, that was insane. Kirishima exclaimed as he dropped onto the floor, sitting heavily while catching his breath. He turned to Sato, who was slouching forward now that he'd finally relaxed. Dude, you were right. I feel like I improved a ton just from that fight. Right, Sato replied with a faint smirk. Mina bounced over, still brimming with energy despite the sweat on her brow and her slightly ragged breathing. It's so frustrating that we didn't land a single proper hit, aside from that tackle, and even then, he shook it off almost immediately. Arg. Despite her words, her smile was wide. Jiro clicked her tongue, clearly less pleased. We were this close to dragging him down from his high cloud, she muttered. Mina swept her gaze across everyone. We should totally do this again sometime. What do you guys say? Kaminari was sprawled on the floor, panting like he was on death's door. Still, he weakly raised a thumb. Way, of course, Kirishima declared. It wouldn't be manly to give up after just one defeat. All right, Sato nodded as well. He had come here to train, and he clearly wasn't done yet. Jiro hesitated, conflicted, but eventually nodded too. She couldn't deny how much their coordination had improved in a single spar. One by one, the five, save for Kaminari, who remained horizontal, turned toward Taka, waiting for his answer. He sweat dropped. This is just the consequences of my actions, he laughed wryly to himself. Still, it wasn't all that bad. After today's spar, he could clearly tell what each of them lacked, at least physically. Quirk training could come later. And since this had been his plan from the start, backing out now would be ridiculous. Very well, he nodded. The group instantly lit up at his agreement. As Taka watched them chatter excitedly among themselves, he let out a soft huff. My life sure is getting busier and busier. Still, that only meant his aura farming future was shining brighter than ever. And as his thoughts drifted ahead, one event loomed clearly in his mind. USJ, I'll be waiting patiently. To be continued. Extra long chapter since I wanted to finish this sparring part fast. How was it? Hopefully it wasn't boring. 32 comments 0 vote. Terrorist attack incoming. After the day of the press invasion, the rest of the first week at UA passed without much of note. Aside from the now recurrent afterclass training sessions, aura farming opportunities dropped dramatically. After all, the in-between events of the show were mostly composed of long, boring classes. Sure, there were occasional chances to shine, like answering questions no one else knew, but even those were scarce. And worse yet, a rival had emerged to take those away from him. Yaoyorozu, of course, time and time again, she stole his chances to answer first, responding with terrifyingly fast, almost robotic precision. After several such incidents, Taka officially reassessed her threat level to be comparable to Midoriya's. One was a threat to his aura farming moments during major events. The other was a threat during filler arcs. Truly, UA was a dangerous place to be an aura farmer. Still, he wasn't one to accept defeat that easily. With his clones arduously studying at home so the chance of him looking like a dumbass would never come to happen, the classes, contents became fresh in his mind, and he even began getting ahead a bit. With such academic prowess at his disposal, Taka managed to beat Yaoyorozu in answering first 7 out of 10 times on average. A total victory, as far as he was concerned. However, while their academic rivalry intensified, at least within Taka's competitive mind, who couldn't allow the spotlight to go to anyone else, they were also forced to cooperate closely as class representative and vice representative. Hero Basic Training class reports had to be documented and handed to Aizawa. Schedules had to be organized and last-minute changes announced. Information about anything particular needed for classes needed to be relayed daily to their classmates, and they were also the ones who were in charge of the class's chat, often reminding everyone about stuff the teachers had asked for homework. Truly perilous tasks. Tasks that Taka abhorred with every fiber of his being. What was worse, he couldn't create clones to handle them while at UA, and barely any of the class representative work reached his home since they stayed as long as required to finish them at school, meaning his clones couldn't help even there. For a brief moment, he even considered sending a clone to class whenever nothing important was happening while he instead remained home to relax for a bit. But the mere thought of letting paperwork defeat him made his blood boil. He was above that. Besides, considering his clone's strange tendency to be wilder than himself, something even the system couldn't explain, who knew what they'd do if he let them roam his prime aura farming grounds? They'd probably reveal all his secret powers just to flex. No, unacceptable. Thus, Taka swallowed his frustration and handled the paperwork with grim determination. Thankfully, Yaoyorozu took care of half the burden, which made it a tad more tolerable. Beyond that, the rest of the hero basic training classes they had after the first were disappointing to say the least. They had focused almost entirely on disaster control and logistics, with zero combat involved. Which meant zero worthwhile aura farming, much to Taka's further dismay. As for the after-class training sessions he had every once in a while with his new classmates, the group became far more coordinated than on the first day, displaying excellent teamwork in their attempts to finally beat him. Unfortunately for them, after the first session, Taka no longer hesitated to activate Let's Dance. Thus, even as their coordination improved by leaps and bounds, without quirks involved, Taka remained decisively superior. And so, the first week at UA came and went without anything truly important happening. Then, at last, arrived the weekend. Now with some time off from aura farming at school in his hands, Taka focused on composing new songs, reading fun stuff online, and exercising a bit. Meanwhile, his clones continued grinding away at everything he didn't want to get rusty in, namely, his fighting skills, breakdancing, and mastery over his many instruments. Of course, he didn't forget to experiment a little amidst all that. Just because he was already at UA didn't mean his abilities had to plateau. His aura had proven to be incredibly versatile, after all. Who knew what else he had yet to discover? So, sitting in his backyard, Taka stared at the flaring aura in his hand with narrowed eyes. Where am I even supposed to start? His current objective was to unlock some form of astral projection. Or at least something that would let him observe things from afar, like an aura-based drone. Anything that could give him an edge in sensory abilities. He was quite lacking at that right now. At present, he could spread his aura and get a faint sense of what lay around him, since it worked like some sort of ethereal sense of touch. Not quite like a touch, but weirder. Still, it was effective. That was how he'd focused on the balls from each team during the combat exercise to rig his own match, don't laugh. But that wasn't enough. He didn't want blurry impressions or vague shape awareness, he wanted to see beyond the limits of his own eyes. Unfortunately, connecting the concept of aura to something as precise and seemingly unrelated to it, such as vision, was proving difficult. A few minutes later, Taka scratched the base of his chin in deep thought and decided that sitting there just wasn't leading him anywhere. So he tried the first thing that came to mind. Let's see, how about this? He severed a tiny speck of aura, which formed into a small bubble of red light that slowly floated away. Then, he attempted to connect with it, really connect with it. Oh, for a split second, it worked. Only. Pop. The moment he tried to actually do something through it, the bubble exploded. There wasn't much aura in it, so all it produced was a soft breeze before dissipating entirely. Still, Taka didn't look displeased. Instead, he blinked in mild disbelief. That's not what I was aiming for, but at least now I know I can give my energy attacks a delayed effect. He glanced around, raising an eyebrow. Doesn't that count as an extra skill? Less than that is merely an additional feature you have discovered. It not sufficient to become independent skill. Greater than. Whatever. It's still useful, Taka replied flatly. Now I can copy that technique I've had in mind for a while. A sphere of pure energy rose from his palm, humming ominously. Only to fizzle into nothingness the very next second as Taka went deadpan. But trying that in my backyard probably isn't the smartest idea. Letting out a wry chuckle, Taka shelved the matter for the next week, or rather, tomorrow. It was already Sunday after all. He could always ask Nezu for access to one of the disposable city facilities to test destructive techniques properly. He recalled that Class 1A had been given access to them before the sports festival to train, and probably other classes too, albeit off-camera. So there shouldn't be any reason for the rat to deny him access. But that's for tomorrow me. Saving the matter in his Todo folder inside his mind, he returned to his original objective. To become omnipresent. So, he got to work. Alright, how about I try forming an eye or something? The lightwork was very pretty, but it didn't go beyond that. Aura shooting from my eyes. Nothing came out. Connect to my very essence and open my third eye. He spent about 10 minutes sitting in a lotus position. Then his ass started to hurt, so he stopped. His weekend continued like that. Flimsy attempts, half-baked theories, and a lot of trial and error focused on something he wasn't even sure his aura could actually do. Perhaps he was overestimating his own potential. Or perhaps, in the end, it would all prove to be worth the effort. Either way, until next weekend, he'd have to wait. Because just like that, his weekend ended, and Monday came knocking the next morning, along with the workload that followed as a class representative. Degree. The next day, class time. Very good, Takahashi. You solved it quite fast, Ectoplasm said, nodding as he eyed the board now filled with advanced calculus all over it. Taka nodded plainly, a bored expression on his face, chalk still in hand. Then, receiving permission to return to his seat, he calmly walked back and sat down. His movements and attitude were fluid and calm, like still water. At least externally, if he hadn't possessed such strong self-control, he might have turned around and sent Yaoyorozu a smug smile. But he was an aura farmer. Mocking an already defeated opponent wasn't auric. HMPH, he snorted inwardly. After that, the class continued without a hitch. Ectoplasm carried on with the lesson before shifting to a more practical approach, handing out a set of exercises. Which Taka, of course, finished in record time. He couldn't afford to be some lame second place. Soon enough, the hour passed, and the recess alarm rang throughout the school. His classmates immediately began standing up from their seats, some lingering behind to chat or eat something quick. Taka, however, seemed intent on staying where he was, calmly waiting for the next class with his usual arms crossed and eyes closed. That plan didn't last long. Takahashi, Ectoplasm called out, snapping him out of his very serious meditation, and forcing one of his eyes open, barely. Yes, Power Loader asked me to tell you to stop by his office, Ectoplasm informed. He says he finished what you requested, and that you can go retrieve it right away. Taka's eyes snapped open, a faint glimmer of excitement slipping through his otherwise unreadable poker face. With a nod, he stood and made his way out of the classroom. His classmates stared after him, baffled. What would someone like him even need? He already seemed practically invincible. That was the collective thought. Leaving behind a thoroughly confused class, Taka stepped into the hallway and headed toward the support workroom. It took him about 2 minutes to arrive, stopping in front of a massive door that rumbled with the sounds of machinery, and the occasional explosion, coming from inside. Without hesitation, he opened it. And immediately, swoosh, clank, a blunt chunk of metal came flying straight toward his face. Fortunately, he caught it with ease in his palm before it could hit him. Sorry, a pink-haired girl with messy dreadlocks apologized, turning for a second, probably to check whether he was dead or not, before snapping back to her work, disregarding him completely. Taka's sweat dropped as he recognized her instantly, despite barely getting a brief second to see her face. The best support equipment creator, or at least in the distant future, Mei Hatsume. He would have thought the world was small to have met her already, but he was literally standing in the one place she was most likely to be, so her presence wasn't exactly surprising. Still, getting greeted by a flying chunk of metal wasn't very nice. Should I throw it back at her when she's not looking? Before he could entertain the thought further, someone else spoke up. Oi, Hatsume, how many times have I told you to be careful of your surroundings? If you make the same mistake again, I'm restricting your access to this room for an entire week. The girl froze instantly, like a statue. Ignoring her horrified expression, the newcomer turned his attention to Taka. It was Power Loader, the instructor of the support course. Takahashi, was it? Come, I have what you asked for. With a nod, Taka followed him deeper into the workshop. They soon arrived at a large table cluttered with all kinds of equipment, devices of wildly different shapes, purposes, and frankly confusing designs. Power Loader knelt beside a large storage box and rummaged through it for a moment before finally pulling something out. I have to ask, Power Loader said, eyeing Taka curiously, what would you even need this for? I read about your quirk. It doesn't seem to mesh well with this, at least not in a way that isn't redundant or unnecessary. I discovered another application for my quirk, Taka replied calmly. Is that so? Power Loader hummed. Well, in that case, no problem. Though, good thing you specified no sharpness. Otherwise, I might have thought you were planning a murder or something. In his hands lay a strange weapon, something between a massive cleaver and a grotesquely uneven saw. Its handle was long and bendable, allowing it to shift between longer reach and close quarters use. A saw cleaver. Taka couldn't stop a small smile from forming the moment he saw it. This shit is so cool. As Power Loader handed it over, Taka felt the sheer weight of the raw iron settle into his grip, his eyes glinting with excitement as he inspected it. He had already taken inspiration for his hero suit from a certain game character from his previous life. Borrowing yet another piece from that same source felt only natural. Of course, unlike in the game, the weapon in his hands had no sharp edge whatsoever. Any cutting or piercing capability had been completely removed. What remained was pure aesthetics, and an absurd amount of weight. A blunt replica made of solid iron. But that hardly mattered to Taka. After all, he had a skill that could grant sharpness to anything. Even if the weapon itself wasn't lethal, in his hands, everything was. And what better test subject than the Nomu? Taka smirked inwardly at the thought, already looking forward to seeing whether that abomination would be able to stand his ground, with everything he had prepared for it. Maybe 3 months ago, he might have struggled fighting it. Maybe he would have even lost. But now, he didn't know for certain. Still, considering his performance against Gigantomachia 3 months ago, when he'd been 3 times weaker than he was now, he liked his chances. The thing supposedly had a monstrous regeneration quirk, along with another that allowed it to absorb All Might's punches like they were nothing. That sounded intimidating. To most people. To Taka, though, it sounded more like, I'm a very durable punching bag. No, scratch that. To Taka, it sounded more like, I'm a very durable piñata. And instead of candy spilling out, it'd be aura. Lots of aura. He. As Taka laughed creepily inside his mind, Power Loader handed him a belt attachment designed to integrate the weapon into his hero suit. Accepting it with grace, Taka bowed faintly before turning and leaving the room, heading back toward his classroom. Just like before, the walk didn't take long. Only a few minutes later, he stood once more at the classroom door. The moment he stepped inside, however, all eyes turned toward him. Or rather, toward what he was carrying. What the hell is that? Kaminari blurted out first, seated near the front and getting a clear view. What's with that big-ass saw? Mina exclaimed next, eyes wide as she stared at the weapon in Taka's grasp. In the next instant, nearly everyone stood up and crowded around him. Dude, that's sick, Kirishima muttered, his hands trembling as they hovered near it. See, can I hold it? Taka nodded curtly and handed it over. Kirishima accepted it eagerly. And almost buckled under the weight. It was, after all, made of raw iron. Just because it lacked sharpness didn't mean it wasn't dangerous. One solid hit could easily crack a skull. Of course, Taka had no intention of being that crude with it. What the hell? This thing's heavy, Kirishima exclaimed, struggling just to lift it properly, let alone swing it. The others leaned in closer, inspecting the weapon with fascination. Kaminari squinted at it. Why doesn't it have an edge? And what's with the saw teeth if it can't even cut? The confusion spread. Jiro narrowed her eyes suspiciously at Taka. More importantly, why do you need this? Isn't your whole thing telekinesis? This seems kinda unnecessary. Yeah, can't you just crush everything with it? Sato asked, scratching the back of his head in confusion. Asui chimed in, placing a finger on her mouth in curiosity. Taka, do you plan to swing it around with your telekinesis? Like a remote-controlled blade. Couldn't he just swing other things if that was the case? With how blunt it is, debris or anything else could have done the job. Shiro pointed out. This blade reeks of darkness, a blade of the void, perhaps. A certain Tokiyami muttered from amidst the crowd, eyes glinting like stars despite the serious tone he was using. By then, curiosity had reached its peak. Everyone was waiting for Taka's answer. However, just as he was about to offer either a dramatic reveal or a very convenient excuse. To your seats, you irrational kids. His savior arrived once again. The voice alone sent everyone scrambling back to their places. Kirishima hurriedly handed the saw cleaver back to Taka before sprinting to his seat. Aizawa snorted, then glanced at Taka, frowning faintly. What's with the blade, Takahashi? As far as I know, you don't need it. The class tensed. Their perpetually grumpy teacher had actually voiced everyone's question. Unfortunately, less than a second later. Well, whatever, go back to your seat. Aizawa waved him off, already losing interest. Taka nodded calmly and did as instructed. The rest of the class deadpanned in unison. Unfortunately, they didn't even have time to sulk. For today's Hero Basics class, it'll be a joint lesson with 3 instructors. All Might, myself, and one more. Aizawa announced from the podium. Several heads tilted at once. 3 teachers for a single class. That alone was enough to grab everyone's attention. Shiro raised a hand. Excuse me, sensei. What are we doing today? Aizawa slipped a hand into his pocket and pulled out a card, much like All Might had during their very first lesson. Unlike back then, however, this one wasn't about combat. It read something that made Taka's previously calm expression twitch for the first time. Today, we'll be doing rescue training, Aizawa announced. That was all it took. This is it, it's finally here. His heartbeat quickened, blood beginning to boil in his body. His gaze flicked to the weapon resting against his desk. And just in time, for once, his mouth curled up into a faint smile. USJ was coming. ... To be continued. Now our dear protagonist has an equally edgy weapon to combine with the rest of his aesthetic. After this, though, I think I'm gonna start making him drift toward a more personal style, rather than just let him cosplay as a game character. Maybe I'll get him to take some of the stuff off, or add stuff that might help with aura farming further. To be continued.